3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Upper Volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, rockharlequin, JoannaKuang. Chapter 11. 3 days later. Snow among endless snow. There were chirpings of birds, but one could not smell the scent of fresh blooms. For a large sum of money, Fengju booked the entire Zhualixian and hired the new prettily rouged dancers in order to invite Donghua out for drinks. In reality, she knew Donghua probably preferred tea, but within the entire imperial city, there was not a tea house as comparably luxurious as the Zhualixian restaurant. Xiao Yan suggested that since she was hosting guests, she might take care to show her sincerity adequately. She was made dizzied by Xiao Yan's ramblings and in a muddled state, decided on Zhualixian. Why did Fengju invite Donghua for drinks? The origin went back to 2 days ago. 2 days ago, her mind was still occupied with how to obtain the saha fruit. She waited on Donghua day in and day out, then coupled with sleepiness, she fumbled her way to class and almost ran head-on into her teacher who was rushing toward her. Because she was still sleepy and wasn't in the mood to deal with him, she bowed her head and stepped to the side. Her teacher beelined for her, however. On his face appeared a layered kind smile, his outstandingly small eyes curved into slits. Fengju shuddered. Her sleepiness instantly dissipated. Her teacher hunched over as he told her in a cheerful doting voice, the list of contestants that was posted a few days ago was transcribed by a minor official. I only knew he left your name out when Daijun called it to my attention last night. He stroked his goat beard and smiled cheerfully in an attempt to mollify her. Forgive me for my poor sight, haha, forgive me for my poor sight. Fengju was overjoyed when she heard her name was now included on the list, which meant she still had a chance at the saha fruit. Then she realized he had said something about Daijun and unabashedly belittled his own eyesight. In a flash, she conceived the reason why she was allowed to join the competition. Her teacher must have misunderstood something again. This was the first time her brain had operated this quickly in the many years she had lived. The teacher was old, but his movements were even quicker than her brain. As she looked up and was about to clarify, all she could see was a black silhouette fading away in the rain. Donghua had helped her. She would have asked him to a meal to show her gratitude had he been someone else. However, ever since they met each other again, Donghua had caused her a number of misfortunes. She wasn't sure if his deeds outweighed his misdeeds, if his misdeeds outweighed his deeds, or if they were about the same. She was unsure throughout the entire class time, then still unsure, finally went to ask Yan Chaiwa who was missing from class that day. The other day Xiao Yan had elatedly waved goodbye to her and moved into His Majesty's magnificent residence. As a matter of course, he was able to see Princess Jihan, the woman of his dream. When Jihan saw Xiao Yan and learned Donghua had exchanged places with him, she turned to stone for a moment. On her beautiful face appeared 2 drops of tear. Those 2 drops of tears crushed Xiao Yan's heart like 2 heavy boulders. He suddenly sensed that this road he had been traveling on was still leading nowhere. That night, Xiao Yan brought 2 wine bottles to the courtyard and drank under the moonlight until midnight. On the last cup, he was suddenly enlightened. When he first found out Fengju was the queen of King Kaiyu, he was very surprised and could not believe the queen revered by everyone in the Eastland and the heir to the nine-tailed white fox clan had been like such. But at this time, he realized Fengju was in reality an incredibly beautiful woman. Now, she was even by Dong Hua's side day in and day out. Of course Xiao Yan himself had also spent entire days with Fengju for a long period of time, but he was a faithful person. Someone like Dong Hua naturally wasn't as faithful as he was. If Dong Hua and Fengju were living together in the same compound, Jiahun's heart had been pained by Dong Hua this time. If he took his chance to comfort her, he'd succeed for sure. As for Dong Hua and Fengju, the first time he met her, he had thought she was Dong Hua's lover, but he paid little attention to her outer beauty then. Afterward, when he had noticed her beauty and found out she was the queen of King Kaiyu and that she had no relation to Dong Hua, he hadn't given much thought whether they were compatible or not. Now in hindsight, they did look well matched when they were together. This was a delightful discovery to him. A frigid wind passed by. Xiao Yan suddenly remembered he had been bad-mouthing Dong Hua all this time in front of Fengju. He thought and thought of ways to change Dong Hua's image in Fengju's eyes. He sat until morning when he eventually caught pneumonia, but still couldn't think of anything. The next morning, Fengju came to find him on her own to ask for his help on how to deal with Dong Hua. Lying splayed on his sickbed with runny snots, Yan Chaiwu thanked the heavens. Xiao Yan genuinely wanted to match-make Fengju with Dong Hua, so in reply to her question, he told her contrary to his true feelings, "Ice face, I mean, Dong Hua has always been an upright, scrupulous person. Not only is he famous in your fairy land, his fame is even exalted in my demon clan." Yet he had gone through the back door to make a request from our teacher for you this time. This isn't a small favor, you know. You say that he didn't come to save you for half a year, that he turned into a handkerchief to deceive you. Those things are inconsequential. They're nothing compared to this big favor he had bestowed you. He cursed himself inwardly at this junction. But for their future happiness, he went on, you should know that for successful men such as ourselves, dignity is more important than our own lives. But Ice Face, I mean, Dong Hua Daijun had sullied our manly dignity for you. Since he was so kind, you must thank him by asking him out for drinks. What's more, this feast has to be at Ziwalixian, the most expensive place in the capital. Hire the prettiest dancers too. He looked at Fengju with utter seriousness and said, we should understand the concept of repaying favors. If we pettily hold onto a grudge and don't repay their favor if only because they had wronged us a little in the past, then we are no different from the ignorant beasts who haven't attained divinity. Fengju was thoroughly confused. Then everything I've told you about how he had bullied me was mere trivial matter? For onlookers, none of it is significant? So all along, I've made a big deal out of nothing. She sadly asked herself, am I a petty person, then? I don't deserve to be the queen of the Eastland, then. Xiao Yan inwardly cursed at Ice Face and at himself. He watched Fengju's face crumbled as though the world was ending, but upon the thought of Jiahun's beauty and kindness, he gritted his teeth and again persuaded her with all the earnestness he could muster. Of course it wasn't a big deal. Dong Hua obviously wanted to befriend you by doing what he did. You should cherish your friendship with such a notable person. All this time, I've misunderstood Dong Hua so much. Actually, Donghua Daijun is a hard-to-find kind soul. How he hated himself right about now. Fengju knitted her brow to mull over this. Xiao Yan gazed to the floating clouds at the end of the sky for a while, then laggardly walked away. 3 days later, a feast was held at the capital's most extravagant Ziwalixian. It was a 1,000-tael feast. The dancers had also cost 1,000 taels per song. Underneath each of their soles was a blooming flower made from silver coins. How it ate away at Fengju's heart. She didn't have one single coin when she first fell to this valley. After half a year, she had only accumulated a small sum from the meals she cooked for Xiao Yan. Today's dinner had drained away half of her hard-earned savings. Donghua sat on the upper balcony, absently toying with the wine cup in his hand. He didn't seem interested in the dancers Fengju had costly hired. But on his right, Yan Chaiwu, who came without being invited, was watching in rapture. Beside him was Princess Jihan, who had also came without being invited. Fengju sighed. It was all right to have these two uninvited guests. It wasn't every day that she threw away money so extravagantly, so it might not be bad to have a few extra witnesses. However, His Third Highness, Prince Liansong of Wuji Palace on Zhukongtian, and her cousin, the little Do Ali, who were tapping their fans to the music, why were these two also present? Was she hallucinating, or did she not wake from her sleep? Even though she was the host, she had been the last to arrive. By the time she turned up, her guests had already taken their seats on the second floor. No one else seemed to have cared about Liansong and the Do's presence. As soon as he saw her, Ali sprang up and looked at her with innocently worried eyes. Then, he pretended to look around the room once, feigned a sigh, and sat back down. Fengju walked upstairs skeptically and nodded a hello to her guests. Still toying with the cup in his hand, Donghua eyed the seat next to him when he saw her. She understood his meaning, scratched her head awkwardly, then slowly strode to the chair he had pointed out to her and seated herself. The moment she sat down, the server standing nearby immediately steeped a new pot of tea. On the other side of the white curtain was the fluttering music played by a beautiful woman, its sounds harmonizing like swimming fish in the stream. Sitting opposite from her, Ali's adorable round face loomed behind the thin fog of steam. Fengju sipped her tea and felt as if she was floating in a dream. But next to her, Jihan's steady gaze at Donghua was so very real. She couldn't determine truth from dream. After some consideration, she gave herself a pinch. It didn't hurt. She must be dreaming then, she thought. She pinched herself again. Donghua's voice came from above. How convenient you choose your pinching spot. Fengju looked down at her frozen hand, which was placed on Donghua's thigh. She quietly retrieved her hand and dryly laughed. I was helping to smooth out your wrinkled garment, Your Majesty. Donghua's eyes surfaced a trace of smile. Fengju didn't see too clearly, but because he was willing to let it go, she took a good look at her own thigh and gave herself a hard pinch this time. She hadn't uttered a cry of pain when Liansong Jun suddenly stopped beating to the music and softly smiled to her. I'm sure Princess Juji must be very surprised to see me and the little prince. I came to give Donghua the new pills the elderly lord just made. Sadly, the little prince happened to have strayed away from his playmate cousin, so I took him along to cheer him up. But, he smiled secretly at Donghua, but I might have been late in bring it. You probably don't have a need for it now. Fengju heard the name Zhu from Liansong and realized why they had acted so strangely when she came upstairs. It seemed they knew the Bianiao clan resented King Kaihu for having green sceneries, so they were helping her to cover up her identity. Liansong didn't normally seem responsible, but he was still quite thoughtful when it truly mattered. Dong Hua seemed already bored with the wine cup. He raised his hand and the white jade bottle that had just been in Liansong's hand somehow had transferred into his own. He gave it a swirl and said, "I don't need it now, but I can speak for the future." Liansong tapped his fan. "If I knew you were going to be this way, I wouldn't have bothered to be courteous." Their secretive conversation piqued Fengju's curiosity. She was about to crane her neck to see what sort of magical medicine was stored in the white jade bottle in Dong Hua's hand when the little doe's patience finally ran out after being ignored for so long. The little doe was wearing a short aquamarine tunic today. When he dashed from his seat to hers, he had seemed like a flash of green smoke. The little doe looked at his cousin with the saddest eyes. It had only been half a year, the kiddo already learned how to be depressed. He continued looking at her forlornly for a long while, then pulled from his belt a little pouch. The small pouch in his hand suddenly grew tenfold, pushing the small lad backward onto the ground. Fengju hastily grabbed his hand and pulled him up. When the pouch's mouth gaped open, a flood of bright light radiated as bounteous night pearls came rolling out and over the pouch. Fengju gaped in surprise. Ali looked at her fervently. "Miss," he cleared his throat, "how absolutely, stunningly, breathtakingly beautiful you are. I must tell you how much I admire you. I present to you this bag of night pearls as our meeting gift." Fengju stumbled as the little doe labored to support her. He whispered in her ears, "Fengju Jija, I already bet your money away the other day, but I heard it's costly to live here, so I brought all my birthday money to help you out. Did I act well?" Fengju leaned on him and whispered back, "Very well, very chivalrous." However, the little doe wasn't the only one who wouldn't sit still today. When Fengju had first come upstairs, she was feeling rather sorry if the marble stage and pretty musicians she had costly paid for didn't result in a few good shows. Princess Jihan did not disappoint as she quickly went around everyone and presented a blue and white ware to Daijun. The moment the cover was lifted, the strong scent assailed Fengju's nose. She recognized it as the scent of cod soup cooked in Mulianzi and Changshen Teng. Jihan's cooking wasn't nearly as good as hers, but this soup she made seemed passable enough. Fengju could remember that Dong Hua had especially liked this Mulianzi soup. His taste hadn't changed even after all these years. The room went silent momentarily. The only sound was of the spoon in Jihan's hand clanking against the vessel. Glancing over, Fengju saw Dong Hua watching Jihan's hands. On them were noticeable red dots. "Didn't I say you can't touch the eternal vines?" Fengju stilled her tea-holding hand. On the other side, Liansong Jun softened his fan flapping. Jihan's shoulders slightly trembled. At length, she replied, "You still remember I'm allergic to Changshen Teng." She shyly gazed up and said, "I was worried you're not used to the dishes from Princess Jug's place, so I made and brought over some soup today. If Mulianzi doesn't have Changshen Teng, the soup would lose the flavor you're used to having. I'm all right, as I didn't touch the vines for too long. But seeing that you are worried for me, I'm. While she was hesitating on the completion of her sentence, Fengju placed her teacup down and cleared her throat. I'll go check how the food preparation is coming along. Xiao Yan sadly stood up. I'll go with you. A Li looked back and forth then stood up as well. Me too, I wanna go too. Dong Hua's soup holding hand suspended mid-air. He looked to Fengju who was now up from her chair. Her attention was on something that was still inside her sleeve. After digging around for a length of time, she pulled out a lovely package of pastries and gave 2 pieces to A Li. Stay here and snack on these. Don't follow and trouble me. Then she turned and offered 2 more to Xiao Yan. You too, have some and don't follow me. But she suddenly withdrew her offerings. Oh, but your health isn't good. You shouldn't eat daikon cakes. And so she gave them to A Li. The dough looked at the daikon cakes in his hand for half a day. He mulled over his options whether he should eat his cakes or go bother Fengju. After thinking a while, he hesitated. I'll eat these while going with you. Tagging along with you won't affect my eating these cakes. Fengju glared at the dough then shifted her eyes to Xiao Yan who stood by quietly. In her impression, Xiao Yan had always been a hyperactive bunny. It's not often she saw him so silent. She couldn't help but stare at him for a time. As she looked at him, she noticed he was eyeing the bowl of soup in front of Dong Hua. Fengju suddenly understood. He must really want Jihan to cook for him like she had for Dong Hua. He must be feeling both sadness and ire that she hadn't cooked for him. Fengju was in fact very in touch with her maternal instinct. After hesitating a while, she decided she must comfort him. She bent her head and looked for a pack of candies from her sleeve. But what to do? Xiao Yan wouldn't eat the candies, and she didn't know how else to comfort him. She looked at him and sighed. I made some daikon, mung bean, red bean, and plum cakes in the morning to snack on rainy days. You don't like mung bean or red bean. Plum cakes though you eat. I added ginger which you don't like. Then she sighed again. Fine, you can come along and trouble me. Xiao Yan seemed to have cheered up some. Can't you make the pastries I like? Then he asked ever more pitifully, or do you not remember what I like anymore? Xiao Yan had never looked so sad. Fengju was clouded with sympathy. She said to him in the affectionate voice one uses for a pet, of course I do, frozen plum cakes with licorice flavor. Then she added, how about we ask for an order of this? Meng Xiao said the cook here is very good, it might be to your taste. Xiao Yan replied with lingering gloominess, fine, tell them to make some. Then he added, I've been craving for salty things lately. Let's ask them to add some salt to the licorice. If it doesn't taste good, we can go back to the old recipe. Or they can make egg yolk cakes too. I guess I can try that. Fengju's head was pounding. She would have already choked him on normal days for having these many requests. But since he was currently feeling vulnerable, she put up with him and gritted her teeth. All right, I'll tell them to make it salty for you to try. At that very same moment, Jihan called out in alarm, Teacher, your soup is spilling. Fengju looked over and at the same time caught Dong Hua's chilly eyes. While Jihan was cleaning up the spill on the table, Dong Hua with his head slightly raised was staring intently at Fengju. His steady eyes unnerved her. The mulyanzi soup was still emitting steam. Lord Lianzong coughed in fits to drive away the silence and spoke, "I've heard much about Princess Zhuge's culinary skills. Mung bean and red bean cakes are some of my favorites. Will I have the honor of trying your pastries today?" Fengju was starting to get numbed from all the staring from Dong Hua. What good timing Lianzong had. She immediately gave him the last in her package. Instruments resumed their playing and Dong Hua's gaze was recalled to the performance. Jihan, who was momentarily forgotten, suddenly raised her voice, "Teacher, will you have another serving?" Yan Chaiwu had left to the staircase and was now signaling with his eyes to urge Fengju away. She lifted her skirt and turned to go. As she passed Dong Hua, she suddenly heard his soft voice, "You're actually familiar with what he likes." Fengju unconsciously lowered her eyes and caught his gaze again. He seemed so cold. Did she do something wrong again? She considered everything that had happened and, as if she finally understood, said, "Ah, did you also want to try my cooking? To be honest, there's nothing special about my pastries. I make steamed fish the best. But didn't I already make that for you?" After everything she said, Dong Hua's expression still didn't change. Fengju scratched her head, then continued a moment later, "Ah, so you did want to eat them, but they're all gone now." She looked to A Li. "Or we can ask His Highness if he would share some with you." She hadn't finished her words when A Li had swiftly hid his share behind his back. "His Third Highness has 6 pieces, I only have 4. You should ask His Third Highness, why are you asking me?" After a moment of thought, he added, "And anyhow, I'm short. I have to eat so I can grow. I think having 1 extra or 1 less isn't going to hurt your growth." "But His Third Highness has 6, I only have 4, A Li scowled. "I'm not giving any to Dong Hua Gaig. I mean, Dong Hua Dai Jun. His Third Highness only took pleasure in stirring up more trouble." He held the 6 treats in his hand and grinned broadly, sidling over. There weren't many chances to aggravate Dong Hua. In high glee, the third prince told Dai Jun, "Princess Juji may know what Yan Chaiwu likes, but that doesn't mean she knows what Dong Hua Dai Jun likes. Take these cakes for example, they are to my taste, but they may not be to your taste. Why must you fight with me for pastries which may not even be to your taste? As old-time friends, must we go through this?" Dong Hua becomes speechless. Xiao Yan stood waiting by the staircase. He impatiently urged Fengju, "Are we going or not? If the cook can't make them in time, you'll have to make them for me." At this very instant, a flying object whizzed at him and sent him stumbling down the stairs. After a series of loud crashes, a furious growl shot upward, "Which bastard tried to murder me?" The soup vessel that was in Dong Hua's hand had inexplicably disappeared. "Sorry, my hand slipped," he said, gazing out absent-mindedly. Ali with a mouthful of daikon cake cheered obscurely, "Whoa, it slipped pretty far." Lianzong and Fengju are both speechless. After the lavishing dinner at Ziwalixian, Fengju hadn't expected the outcome of spending all that wealth was her own confinement. The fact was that after waking up early to get ready this morning, she followed the small path inside the estate and headed for the gate to go to school. Her foot naturally landed on the ground when, bam, she was thrown backward upon contact with a clear force field. Fengju grew up under her Aunt Bai Qian's care since she was a little child. Her aunt had spoiled her rotten, and so she was willful even as baby fox. Whenever her infuriated father grounded her, she always kicked down the door or window to slip out. There wasn't one punishment she couldn't deal with. But her cleverness was completely useless this time. Dong Hua was so shameless, he had enveloped the entire Jai Feng Yuan into his force field. She wasn't nearly good enough to break out of this barricade. Now at this age, she was finally confined into a place. She charged to Dong Hua's bedchamber ready to confront him. Dai Jun had only gotten out of bed, now tying his outer robe. Meeting her furious glare, he spoke to her in the languidness of a sleepy person. I think I heard you were interested in that competition's saha fruit. Feng Zhu looked confused. Dai Jun casually explained, since I used my name to get you into the competition, won't my reputation get tarnished if you don't win? What strange things to come out of his mouth. Hadn't the king always ignored things like reputation? Since when did he start to care for it? Still confused, she questioned him, but what does that have to do with locking me in here? Dai Jun looked up at her, now finished with tying his robe. So I can teach you myself. Outside, a dead twig cracked under the weight of thick snow. The spooked birds flew away and crashed into the glassy barrier. She had never heard that Dong Hua, the king who was born out of the blue sea since the beginning of time, had taken in any student. To be taught by him was even more of a pipe dream. Although Jai-hun called him teacher, Feng Zhu had a hard time imagining he could really teach her anything. For such a Dong Hua to feel inclined to teach her was certainly a strange thing. Nonetheless, Feng Zhu did always deem herself a wise fairy. If Dong Hua could personally teach her a few secret moves, what difficulty would there be in winning the Saha fruit in the coming championship? At this thought, her anger was swept away and she smiled brightly in agreement. There was another reason for Feng Zhu's change of mind. The tournament being held 10 days from now was especially important to her. 2 days ago, she was told all competitions including duels had always been held outside of the imperial city. Moreover, according to Fanyan Valley's laws, magic was forbidden beyond the city walls. What if the challenge was changed into some sort of fruit carving competition? Feng Zhu had worried. Luckily, after asking Meng Xiao, she found out this competition didn't require too many techniques after all, it remained a fencing competition. But because the rules disallowed magic, the result would be dependent on swordsmanship itself. Sword fighting was a fairly simple matter for Feng Zhu. After all, she had been playing with the Dozua sword since she was a baby. But when Meng Xiao waved his arm to show her the floating arena of icy stakes looming behind the foggy mist on the bare mountainside, she was stunned to stone. When Meng Xiao next said the candidates would compete on those ice stakes and the first to fall would lose, she was stunned even further. This game didn't exist in King Kaiu. This was why she had left early for school this morning. She had planned on asking Meng Xiao for a few tricks to better handle her opponents. Unexpectedly, Dai Jun blocked her in. As if he had taken the wrong medicine, he even offered to train her himself. By the time Feng Zhu woke up from her elation, she found herself standing in the kitchen making breakfast for Dong Hua. Did Dong Hua really keep her here to help her win the approaching tournament? Was he that nice? Or did he take the wrong meds? But even with the wrong meds, Dai Jun couldn't have been that nice. Feng Zhu served Dong Hua through his breakfast while her mind was filled with questions. Throughout the meal, she barely touched any food, and didn't know what she was eating. When she was clearing the table, she hazily heard Dong Hua map out their training plan for the next 10 days. He seemed to have said the first 3 days were to be spent on learning how to walk. Dong Hua was indeed playing with her. From what she had learned the hard way in recent days, she knew she mustn't defy him even when he teased her. She needed to find out every detail of his scheme, then find a chance to sneak out of here. That would be the better strategy. At the end of the dragon hour, 9 a.m., Feng Zhu sauntered to the rear courtyard to meet Dong Hua. Her eyes widened the second her feet passed the arching doorway. The vast courtyard had turned into a floating arena of snow posts. Each post was as tall as 2 persons, arranged into columns and rows exactly like the dueling grounds by the mountainside which Meng Xiao had shown to her. Beyond that spot, everywhere else within the normally snowy courtyard was covered in new sprouts, the entire landscape a spring scene. On the old apricot trees, white blossoms spotted the branches like drops of dew. Morning light glistened on the clear force field. Under a large canopy, Daijun was idly lounging on a long bench. What an effort the king had put in only to sunbathe in the midst of snow. When her puzzled eyes once more glanced to the ice arena, her body suddenly levitated. When she regained her cognition, a draft was sweeping snow dust by her face. She found herself standing alone on a snow post. Dong Hua had left his bench. Today he wore a pristine white robe. Standing tall and elegant outside the arena, he raised his head to her a while, then unhurriedly spoke, "First, we'll use 1 day to practice standing. If tomorrow you can walk up there blindfolded as you do on the ground, we'll start fencing on the 3rd day." He went on to study her a while more. "You've stood quite long even though your magic had been taken away. Not bad." Feng Zhu fought to keep her balance and didn't dare to move. Her voice was filled with suppressed anxiety. I didn't tell you that without my magic, I'm really afraid of height." "Ah, help me, Your Majesty!" she yelled out as she slipped and fell. But her fall wasn't as painful as she had imagined. Feng Zhu blinked and perceived Dong Hua in her view, catching her. "Hey, you didn't leave me up there intentionally thinking I would fall off and then take the opportunity to reap a cheap gain." Daijun's hand was still wrapped around her waist. Surprised, he asked, "Are you sleep-talking? Then why are you holding me like this? Look, your hand is still on my waist." Daijun looked to his hand, then gave her a once-over and said, "So you've got your footing then?" Without waiting for her reply, he withdrew his hand. Feng Zhu was leaning against him for support. When he removed his hand, she fell to the ground. Fortunately, it wasn't too painful thanks to the thick snow cushioning her fall. She gritted her teeth and climbed up to her feet. She raised her head to see Dong Hua's offered helping hand. His habitually placid eyes showed a teasing gleam which pissed Feng Zhu off. She turned her head and pushed him away to stand up by herself. "I was only quipping with you. How can you be so petty?" she said, as she dusted the snow from her body. Then at the thought of something else, her anger ignited again. "You're actually playing with me, aren't you? How can I walk blindfolded up there in only 1 day? You have a secret technique but you won't tell me. Aren't you petty?" It's a good thing you never taken any student. We'd only get teased by you all day long, then eventually we might even age prematurely and still not learn a thing." She spoke so valiantly, head raised high, that the white hairpin on her head shook as it threatened to fall off. At last, it fell away from her hair, and Dong Hua, who had been waiting, reached his hand out to catch it. Looking down at the hairpin in his hand, his eyes glimmered in recollection of something. "They say to meet a playful teacher is a godsend blessing." Fengju really didn't know what to say anymore. "Don't think I haven't read my books. They clearly say a serious teacher, not a teasing teacher." "Oh, is that so? I forgot. But it's all the same," Dong Hua replied in purported surprise. Then he slid the hairpin back onto her hair. While admiring it, he told her, "If you're after the saha fruit, then just do as I say, you won't go wrong." Although cheating in these sorts of competitions to make you win is plenty easy, they've unfortunately selected me as one of the judges. Do I look like the type that would endorse cheating? It was too surprising hearing these words coming out of his mouth. Fengju turned to the side and rubbed her jaw. "I don't think you're unfamiliar with these sorts of things." Daijun wasn't too happy with the hairpin on her head. He removed it and turned it into a pink flower, then carefully pinned it back on her hair. "Then let's just say I'm being upright for once." Despite Dong Hua's words, Fengju knew it was right for him to teach her according to the principles. Her identity was special. Moreover, the Bianiao Queen would also be in attendance. If anything disreputable were to be uncovered, her name would be implicated, and she'd only be creating a tempest in a teacup, for the animosity between King Kaiyu and Fanyan would undoubtedly exacerbate. Daijun wasn't playing with her, he was being thoughtful, and she was pleased. But Daijun didn't say any of this precisely, so she didn't think she should show that she knew his intentions. She silently touched her new hairpin and cleared her throat. "Then I'd have to thank you for putting in the effort to teach me." As she said these words, she felt her remark had been a little disrespectful, thus wanted to say something in reprieve, but Daijun casually spoke first. "No problem. It's just quite rare to meet someone as dim as you. I look forward to the challenge." Entirely baffled, Fengju put away all her guilt and ignited again. "I don't believe I'm more stupid than Ji. Didn't you also teach her?" Dong Hua was amused by her outraged appearance. He enjoyed watching her for a time before replying, "Ji? I did guide her by obligation for a period of time many years ago. But I'm not Zhi's teacher. After being unable to learn from me, she became Demu Yuanjun's student." He then added, "Had this been bothering you?" Fengju was absorbed by the words "by obligation." She hadn't paid attention to the rest of what he said. Having forgotten her anger, she unconsciously repeated those words, "by obligation." A drafty wind cast a thin curtain of snow dust over her eyes. Dong Hua dazed out and at length replied, "I was a parentless child. In the beginning, when I first sprang forth from the blue sea, I didn't have enough fairy energy and was at the mercy of wild beasts. Zhi's parents brought me home in sympathy and raised me up out of good grace. 90,000 years later, just before they passed away, they finally conceived Ji. Since they entrusted her to me, of course I had to care for her." Perhaps it had been so long ago, he himself was struggling with the details. He reflected, "But it seemed she didn't learn anything from me. Zonglin told me she once said she didn't need to learn anything because I was already there for her. Although it seemed as though Dong Hua didn't carry an assiduous appearance in recent years, it was because for him, there was no more space for further progress. He himself had always been notorious for disliking unaspiring people. From these words, he likely wasn't pleased with Ji He. But Feng Ju felt she herself wasn't an aspiring person either, and couldn't help but sympathize with Ji He. To be honest, if I was Ji He, I'd also feel that I don't need to learn anything because you are already there. The wind carried with it apricot blossoms from afar. The petals drifted above her head. While preventing her hair from being blown in the wind, she heard Dong Hua's voice, You're different, Xiao Bai. Feng Ju looked up in surprise and caught his gaze. Dai Jun quietly looked at her for a moment. I'm a little thirsty from all this talking. I'll go brew some tea. Take this time to practice. You wanted some. The first day being trapped inside the force field, Feng Ju practiced walking on the snow piles for hundreds of times under the soft sunlight and mild breeze. Initially, she was terrified and fell twice. But it wasn't very painful and she eventually calmed down. She fell more than a dozen times throughout the day. Her feet were covered in scrapes, her forehead in bumps. By sunset, Feng Ju, who was originally acrophobic, could walk normally on these snow columns. Dong Hua had brewed some tea, sat outside the arena, and played chess by himself all day. On the second day, the weather improved greatly from the first. Snowy blasts were no longer as strong. Dai Jun kept his words and blindfolded her. Then he threw her onto the arena to practice her footwork on the icy formation. After stumbling around for a time, the ground abruptly started to shake. Thinking Dai Jun had added new challenges, she swiftly leaned on a stake to keep her balance. Unexpectedly, one of the stakes from behind broke off, spinning her round. In a panic, she lost her footing as she tumbled onto the ground, her lips landing on something soft. She fumbled around searchingly as she tried to lightly bite on it when suddenly she heard Dai Jun grunted in the dark. Startled, she snatched down the silk band on her eyes. Dai Jun's face appeared inches away from her face. A row of sharp teeth marks lined his lower lip. Feng Ju's face blanched white then flushed red. In the air, Third Prince Liansong was fanning his fan as he smiled brightly. Ali made a fuss wanting to come look for his cousin. I opened your force field up not knowing I'd be disturbing the two of you. My bad, my bad. The little doe was indeed floating in the air looking down at them. His eyes grew round. His mouth was opened so big one could stuff 2 eggs inside. In shock, he asked, Did Feng Jujija just kiss Dong Hua Gaig? Am I going to have a nephew? Then in dismay, he cried, What am I going to do? I still haven't prepared myself for a nephew. He mounted a rainbow cloud and flew away in a huff. Liansong Jun looked back down to the 2 people huddling on the ground, but because he was afraid the little doe would cause trouble, he chased after the kid while feeling sorry he had to leave the good show. Feng Ju quietly slid off of Dong Hua's body and slinked back to the arena. After several steps, Dai Jun's voice called to her from behind, Xiao Bai, shouldn't you at least say sorry for biting me? Sorry I've bitten you. Are you truly sorry? Feng Ju tripped and glared back in irritation. What do I gain from lying to you? What else can one hope to gain from lying? Dong Hua asked in genuine perplexity. Isn't it for your own gratification? Fine, you win. On the third day under a warm breezy sky, Fengju had mastered how to traverse blindfolded on the snow columns as if she was walking on the ground after 2 days of hard practice. She had been to school, and could vaguely remember these words from one of the ancient books: wither the heart, because all are phenomena, and because all are emptiness, all phenomena are therefore also emptiness. Reaching this state shall lead to triumph. From this Buddhist phrase, she believed the phenomena were these snow piles, and she would truly be valiant if she could go into her massacre mode in this snow forest with open eyes without minding the snow piles. She needed to practice today as if nothing existed. She expressed this idea to Dong Hua. He was very impressed and agreed to let her remove her silk blindfold. She took a few turns, feeling that things indeed went very smoothly. White apricot blossoms hung idly like puffs of clouds. Perhaps bored from 2 days of playing chess by himself, Daijun found a bit of good clay somewhere and busied himself shaping it as he sat outside the snowy arena. Having seen him make ceramics in the past, Fengju knew he was always concentrated on his work. But his countenance was different today. As she practiced, she glanced over in his direction from time to time. Once, twice, then thrice. By the 4th time she slipped and toppled off the 10-meter tall post. But finally she was able to see what Daijun was making. He seemed to be making a doll. She only fell that one time today, a much better result compared to the previous 2 days. At dinner, Daijun gave her several more pieces of steamed fish as her reward. As she contemplated on how to casually ask Daijun what sort of doll he was making during the day, she choked on a fish bone and was forced half a bowl of vinegar down her throat by Daijun to wash down the bone. Afterward, she forgot about her question. What exactly did Daijun make? Fengju was still curious before she went to bed. She knew Dong Hua had handmade many porcelain wares, but never had she seen a porcelain doll. She fell earlier in the day because she had been busy stealing glances at him. When Dong Hua saw her, he first gazed back at her for a long time, but then determinedly turned his back against her. Fengju couldn't figure out what he was doing. But the more she was kept in the dark, the more she wanted to know. So, should she sneak into his bedchamber tonight while he slept to find out? Although it wasn't proper for a woman to wander into a man's room at night, she had been to his room so many times before. She had even slept on his bed a few times. His room might as well have been her backyard. What harm was there in visiting it one more time? Moonbeam filtered through the window panes. Fengju sleepily mulled over the matter through her throbbing head and aching back. She only planned to close her eyes for a moment before sneaking into Dong Hua's room, but because she was exhausted from the day's training, her eyelids closed shut the second she lay down. She drifted into sleep soon after. Even so, this matter remained in her head, and she did not sleep very deeply. After midnight, she foggily heard footsteps approaching. Then there was the sound of opening doors followed by more footsteps coming toward her bed. These were the steps which, no matter what situation, were always serene and poised, the same ones she had listened to countless of times when she was still at Taichan Palace. Fengju tried opening her eyes, but sleepiness weighed heavily on her eyelids like an enchantment. The room stilled for a moment. Fengju felt as if she was in a dream. She was likely dreaming this up because she had wanted to sneak into Donghua's room before falling asleep. She snuggled the blanket tightly and continued sleeping. But in her foggy state, she could hear a series of soft sounds. Before her sleep could deepen, she inhaled the scent of soporific incense. Her mind, which had been mostly foggy, was now entirely numb. One synapse was still working, however. Was the incense lighted by Daijun? She reminded herself to look into the burner the next morning to see whether there were soporific incense ashes in it. Then she'd know if Daijun had woken up to take care of her. As her thoughts wandered in the night, the bed suddenly sank. Being quite old, it creaked squeaky noises. Fengju sensed a cold palm resting on her forehead. When its fingers moved to the 2 bumps she had acquired during practice this morning, she felt a slight twinge of pain. How could her dream be so real and detailed? She gritted her teeth, took in a deep breath, muttered something, and turned her back. That hand withdrew. A little later, a flowery scent overtook the soporific incense smell. She sneezed, muttered again, and turned. That hand was now spreading something paste-like onto the swellings on her forehead. It continued to gently caress her. It felt nice, like a beautiful dream, and she fell deeper into sleep. Ah, it was the scent of cotton rose mallow paste. She knew it now. Mufurong paste could alleviate pain and treat hematoma. Fengju was well aware of this. When she was a baby fox at Taichan Palace, she often ran to the small garden to pick mufurong flowers. In those days, next to the Bodhi-covered wall were several landscaping mufurong plants. Their frail petals scattered on the ground whenever the wind blew. She had used her claws to gather the fallen petals into a silk pouch Zonglin had gifted her. When she had enough, she would fasten the pouch with her teeth and happily run to the small stream nearby to soak the petals into a paste which she later gave to Donghua to dress his injuries. Back then, Donghua's hands often cracked due to various inexplicable reasons. When she gave the flower poultice to Donghua, he had petted her ears. She wasn't one to wax poetic, but she wrote a very short stanza that day in memory of her emotions. Flowers bloom and die, flowers powderized. In happiness and harmony, always together, you and I. When she showed this poem to Siming, he had laughed so much and told her he wanted to barf from the corniness. She hummed and fingered an extra line, "You may want to barf, but I don't." As she left merrily with her tail wagging, she thought to herself she had only written one poem in her entire life, yet the person she wrote it for would never get to read it. In her dream, she felt a sudden sadness. Her arm was suddenly lifted. Her silk undergarment was rolled down to her shoulder. The coldness in her heart quickly spread to her fingertips. Fengju shivered. This dream was starting to feel too realistic. Her muddled mind began to rouse after that shiver, but she still could not lift open her eyes. Despite her heavy eyelids, she managed to open a crack. The shadow that was becoming clearer in the crack of light did turn out to be Daijun. His head was slightly tilted and his hand was still on her shoulder. His long silvery hair cascaded like moonlight onto the damask quilt. His hair was slightly tangled, giving his beautiful face a faint look of languidness. His serene eyes were looking at her under the glowing light. Daijun habitually had tangled hair even when he went to sleep in a proper position. To Fengju, this aspect of him was especially lovable. How remarkably realistic this dream was becoming. Nevertheless, there should still be reasons inside of dreams. She wanted to ask Donghua why did he come by so late? Then she answered herself that it was probably to help her count her bruises from this morning. Then she wanted to ask him why must he come in the middle of the night? Then she answered herself again that Mufurong paste worked best when the patient was in a relaxed state. Then she wanted to ask him why did he need to take her clothes off, didn't he know any propriety? Then she sighed and answered herself, he had never cared for such things. He would only think of her as a fanciful woman if she were to mention these things. But besides these questions, she didn't have anything else to ask. She should be yelling in fear, then she should scramble into the corner, cover herself under the bed quilt, and look frightened and furious that she was being taken advantage of as she glared at Daijun. She had thought of all of the above, but she would appear even more fanciful like that. One should never respond normally in dealing with Daijun. She must stay cool and unruffled. Fengju lay still and let Daijun's hand remain on her swollen shoulder. I'm awake, she said woodenly. In the candlelight, Donghua looked at her a while, withdrew his hand and whipped the paste from the porcelain bowl to apply on her shoulder. Good, then unbutton your collar. I can't reach your back shoulder. How could he keep his face straight while asking her to unbutton her clothes? Baffled for a length of time, Fengju at last pulled the bed cover all the way up to her chin, turned her back to him, and said, I'm going back to sleep. As she turned, Donghua stopped her. He held her left shoulder where she wasn't bruised and lowered himself down. Are you afraid I'd do something? His voice hinted a glint of amusement. Fengju turned around and saw that Donghua's face was only inches away from hers. The indigo jewel on his forehead reflected the light from the candle, a smile dancing in his eyes. She stared out dazedly. He nonchalantly looked at her from head to toe. What can I possibly do with you injured like this? Fengju backed away and said in a miff, if you know I'm badly injured, why didn't you help me during the day? Why bother pretending to be nice now? When she tilted her head to the back, her chin touched the injury on her shoulder and she groaned in pain. This was when she realized she hadn't noticed that her bruises had been treated, all but the one on the back shoulder. Only that spot remained painful. Daijun moved back slightly and said, of course you have to get yourself up after a fall during practice. Only then will the training work. It's better for me to not always be there to help you. Then he raised his hand to flick her buttons open and elevated her with a cushion behind her back. His fluid movements had no sign of hesitation. When the cool paste was applied to the bruises on her milky shoulder, Fengju again stiffened. In truth, Donghua was right. His reasoning was the sensible kind. Although she conceded this fact in her mind, she stubbornly huffed, you're speaking as if I'm completely useless. Haven't I lived well without your help all this time after falling down here? She added, I didn't have one scratch prior to meeting you again. But look at all these injuries you're causing me now. Donghua's hand seemed to pause on her shoulder for longer than necessary. He arched a brow at her. Without the protection of my Tiankeng cage, you'd have been smashed into pieces when you fell to the Fanyan royal palace gates. You wouldn't still be here for me to torture. Fengju immediately retorted, it was Xiao Yan who helped me. She suddenly stopped mid-sentence. She and Xiao Yan fell twice from a cliff. Aside from the second time which they landed on Meng Shao, everything indeed went very smoothly for them. She didn't know whether it was her luck or Xiao Yan's luck which had saved them. As it turned out, it was actually Dong Hua's Tiankang cage that had protected them. This discovery stifled Feng Zhu's tongue. She bit her lip, not knowing what to say. So Dai Jun hadn't left her to rot. She had heard how important the Tiankang cage was among the deities, yet he had left it in her possession for her protection. He had been so kind and gracious, yet why didn't he say so sooner? Regardless, it wasn't a good idea for her to keep such an important object. She only saw the Tiankang cage once during his fight with Xiao Yan. Its energy had felt vastly different from other magical objects. She wondered where he had hidden it on her body. Puzzled, Feng Zhu raised her head to ask Dai Jun, then, where is it? She coughed awkwardly and turned her head away. I'm grateful the Tiangang cage has protected me all this while, but it's not a good idea to leave such a precious item with me. I should still return it to you. Dai Jun held the candle in his hand and massaged the bruise on her shoulder. What are you returning it to me for? It's only an extension of my fairy energy. Once I die, it'll automatically dissolve. He had said it so naturally, it made her even more confounded. You'll also die? Why will you die? Although the gods and fairies weren't bound by mortality, eternal life was only possible if no calamity fell upon the world. There were any number of disasters on heaven down to earth, however. From the beginning of time, numerous immortals had died as a result of these natural catastrophes. Feng Zhu heard that toward the end of the prehistoric era, there had been a multitude of mortal realms within the great trichiliocosm. Being the weakest, the human clan was driven to the lower sphere. But since the lower sphere was newly created at the time, the fundamental order had not been established. Droughts, floods, and glacial climates took turn to plague their world. The humans had a difficult time living. A number of deities who came before Donghua had spent considerable time to regulate natural conditions to suit the humans' characteristics. Depleting their energy in this effort, they eventually passed away. Their spirits went back to spatial chaos and there was no traces of them left in the world. Feng Zhu vaguely understood that these forefathers had to shoulder burdensome responsibilities due to their extraordinary ability. They needed to sacrifice their lives for the survival of the world. But Donghua remained alive to this day. She had assumed he was different from the rest. If there were to be a day when he ceased to exist, it was a faraway thing. Now that he mentioned it, she felt as if it would be upon them before long. Suddenly dismayed, a chill took over her body and her throat went dry. She faltered, if that's the case, when will you? The soporific incense lingered heavily in the air. A few fireflies slipped through the window crack. Donghua seemed surprised by her question. He buttoned back her collar and after a moment of thought, replied, "Since the start of time, there has not been a natural catastrophe so grave it leads to an apocalypse. If ever that day comes, that will be when I have to go." He looked at her a while and a smile surfaced in his eyes. "But this won't happen for at least many thousand years more. You don't have to worry to tears yet." Mesmerized by the unique incense, more and more fireflies filled the room. They resembled emerald gems specking in the dark night. Donghua was called Ice Face by Yan Chaiwu. Those whom he disliked were all called this way. Donghua was first on that list. Although there was some truth in this nickname, it wasn't used to imply his icy personality, it was rather used to imply his emotionless expression even while mocking others in his perpetually unsmiling face. He was smiling often tonight. Whether it was only in his eyes or in his voice, it was enough to make her dazzled. Still, she heard what he had just said very clearly. She weakly objected, "Why would I be worried?" while sighing in secret relief nevertheless at his words. She grinned at Dong Hua, then after a moment of silence, she changed topics. "I don't see any new wound on your hand. Why do you still carry cotton rose mallow paste with you?" Dong Hua was silent for a time at this question. Eventually, he said, "How do you know I'm often injured?" Feng Ju perspired. No one was supposed to know about his injuries besides his closest servants and that little fox. Even Auntie Bai Qian, who had close relations with Zhu Kongtian, shouldn't know this fact, let alone herself. Luckily, wit came to save her at the last minute. "Isn't cotton rose mallow used to treat injuries on hands?" She pretended to peek into the porcelain bowl in his hand. "Did you make this paste yourself? It's blended very well." Dong Hua mixed the rest of the paste in the bowl and lowered his gaze to her, replying, "I used to have a baby fox. It made this paste." Feng Ju generously praised herself. What a clever fox it must have been. "The paste is so smooth and fragrant, but why are you spreading it on my face?" Dong Hua bent down, spread the rest of the paste onto her face, and casually replied, "Well, there's a bit left, and I heard this is also good skincare, so we shouldn't waste it." Feng Ju broke free and picked up a bit of the paste from the porcelain container with her finger. She lunged at him and grinned. "Here, good things are to be shared, you should use some too." She pushed Dong Hua down and used her other hand to spread Mufurong paste onto his forehead. His eyes were glimmering. A few fireflies landed on his shoulder, some on the divider screen. The wilting lotus canvas came to life under their glow. Feng Ju knelt on him. With one hand she held his arm down underneath the bed cover, with the other she removed the silk headband from his forehead. This was the first time she saw Dong Hua's eyes at such a close distance. This man was the most revered god in the universe, the person she most admired. She suddenly realized the awkward position they were in and froze on the spot. Daijun didn't resist her harassment. With little concern, he only said to her, "Didn't you say good things are to be shared? Why did you stop?" He took Feng Ju's retreating hand and placed it on his own face, looking calmly into her eyes during this entire process. Feng Ju felt her face burning. She clambered off him and scrambled into the corner. Hiding herself underneath the cover and lying on the porcelain pillow, she feigned a yawn. "I'm sleepy. Close the door for me when you leave." For some reason, her voice was quivering. Daijun seemed disappointed. "You're going to sleep without washing your hand." "No need, I'll wash the quilt tomorrow." Dong Hua sat up and stayed in the room a while. A wind entered and blew the light out. There seemed to be an enchantment cloaking over the air. Nervously, Feng Ju could feel Daijun's breath drawing closer. His hair was now grazing her cheeks, but there was no other movement. It had seemed he was only checking whether she was really sleepy or only pretending to be. Footsteps went further away in the dark. Only after she heard the door opened then closed did Feng Ju heave in relief. She turned and opened her eyes to survey the room. Fireflies were still glowing on the furniture. Now dim and not as lively as they had been, they were perhaps sleepy as well. There was something strange about Donghua tonight. Her heart pounded rapidly as she thought about what had just happened. She reached a hand out to calm her chest and recalled they were still covered in flour paste. As she glimpsed down on them in the pulsating firefly light, she saw that her hands were now clean with no traces of stain. Donghua must have wiped them away before leaving. Feeling happy, her lips slightly curved up, she hadn't known she was smiling. Then she closed her eyes, whispered the tranquil heart mantra, and peacefully fell asleep. At the end of the tiger hour, 5 a.m., Fengju's sleeve was shaken vigorously. She turned and muttered sleepily, "Your Majesty, don't bother me when it's so late." "Let me." The word sleep hadn't left her mouth when it died out in the shocked eyes of Xiao Yan, who was bending over her bed. Venus shone high in the sky. "You and Ice Face have progressed to this point." He clapped. "I really haven't underestimated him." Then he said to Fengju happily, "Jihan should give up on him. I knew he's not as faithful as I am. He couldn't handle your seduction scheme." Now scratching his head excitedly, he asked, "How should I comfort Jihan so she would run into my arms with no hesitation?" Illuminating the room was a single night pearl. Fengju saw Xiao Yan lean against the bed looking to the moon. He was happy, then pensive, then worried. Confused, she didn't know what was going on. She rubbed her eyes, pinched Xiao Yan and asked, "Does that hurt?" Jumping back, he cried, "Don't pinch me, you're not dreaming. I broke open Ice Face's force field to take you to console our friend." Finally remembering what he had come here for, Xiao Yan told her in a solemn tone, "Do you know what happened to Meng Xiao?" Fengju had been confined inside Jai Feng Yuan for 3 days. She couldn't even talk to a mosquito. Naturally, she didn't know a thing. But Xiao Yan's serious expression lifted her sleepiness. Alarmed, she asked, "Meng Xiao?" Xiao Yan's expression grew even more somber. "His most beloved General Chongsheng recently passed away. He's been drinking at Ziwalixian from dusk to dawn mourning for his death. His cousin Jia Lu is afraid he might die drunk there and came to ask for my help. But you know I'm not great at helping others. Women are better at it." Fengju put on an outer coat and pondered, "I never knew Meng Xiao kept men in his estate. What bad friends we are for never noticing this preference of his. My, what a shock it must be for him to lose a loved one like this. Poor Meng Xiao." As she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered the things from last night, and was trying to recall whether they were real or not. She went to the nightstand against the wall, opened the unicorn incense burner, and took a whiff. No soporific incense fragrance. She took Xiao Yan's night pearl and scrutinized the burner for new ashes. There was none. Staring into the bronze mirror, the bruises on her forehead was no longer there. But there were no traces of mufurong paste either. Was she dreaming? And yet, why would she dream such things? "What's wrong?" Xiao Yan asked as he received the night pearl from her hand. Fengju was silent for a second before replying, "I had a dream." A short pause. "Never mind, it's nothing." She headed for the door, then returned to the chest by the window and took out a celadone bottle. "I previously borrowed some premium honey from Meng Xiao to make honey cake. I didn't expect having to use it for his hangovers so soon. What a pity. Xiao Yan frowned. The honey container is on the right. The one in your hand has soy sauce written on it. He studied her a while and sighed, You're acting strange tonight. Why don't you go back to sleep? If I can't persuade Meng Xiao, I'll knock him out with a stick. Fengju rubbed her temple. I'm probably just dizzy from the lack of sleep. Since I'm already awake, I should go. She moaned a little then said, But we should still take that stick along. Under the guidance of the starlight, they headed straight to Ziwalixian. Meng Xiao's tears, snot, and alcohol mixed together while he stared at General Changshen's body lying in the ceramics box. A group of kneeling maids surrounded him. They tried to persuade him through tears, telling him things such as the dead was already gone, they should send him off now, His Highness the Prince should cheer up so the general could go in peace. Fengju was speechless. Xiao Yan, as well. It turned out General Changsheng who drove Prince Meng Xiao to inconsolable sorrow was a red-headed cricket. A tired-looking Princess Jiaolu was helped over by two maids. Xiao Yan scratched his head and asked her in puzzlement, Brother Meng is so sensitive, he's pained over a cricket. I'm not sure what to say to comfort him. Fengju glanced at the ceramics box encasing General Changshen's body and for some reason felt a familiarity. There were raining petals etched on the sides. It seemed like something young ladies carried, not something for gentlemen like Meng Xiao. She took another look. General Changsheng lay stiff-cold. From his body, one could tell he was once a valiant cricket when he was still alive. She furrowed her brow and said to Princess Jiaolu, perhaps after living so long in the valley, this cricket had absorbed enough divine essence to turn into a handsome lad, and that was why Meng Xiao loved it so much. Jiaolu gasped a cry, covered her ears, and shot a glare at her. How dare you smear my cousin's reputation like that? I want to assume this cricket had turned into a maiden too, Fengju helplessly replied. But this is a male cricket. Brother, take a look, isn't this a male cricket? Xiao Yan came closer to take a look and answered her, from my many years of experience with cricket fighting, this is indeed a male cricket. Jiaolu's face turned purple with indignation. She pointed at the pair speechlessly. Her maid knowingly brought over a cup of tea to cool her down. After her rage waned a little, she glared sideways at the pair of them, sighed resignedly, and said, Never mind, although I don't trust you two in the least, you are my cousin's closest friends. Perhaps he will listen to you. This cricket is only a cricket. It can neither turn into a handsome lad nor a beautiful maiden in the middle of the night. She glowered at them again. But the person who gifted him this cricket was someone special. She's whom he keeps in his heart. Fengju and Xiao Yan immediately raised their ears to listen. Restricted by their clan's rules, the Bianiaos never intermarried with other clans. Clan's rules were a life and death matter to this particular clan. It was rare for mystical creatures to absorb enough divine essence and become immortals like the dragons, the phoenixes, or the nine-tailed white foxes. Other clans lived a limited lifespan 1,000 years, perhaps 10,000. Among them, the Bianiaos was the shortest, they lived no longer than a millennium. Compared to fairies outside the valley, their lives were as fleeting as the sun's rise and fall. Marrying Lungvu outsiders could easily lead to tragedies, and for this reason, their clan forbade intermarriages with foreigners. At 60, a biennial was considered an adult and could marry. Meng Xiao's 2 younger brothers and 3 younger sisters were already wedded. Especially compared to the third Xiongli prince who already had 7 little biennials, the second prince who was older than the third prince by nearly 20 years was still a bachelor. After meals, Fengju and Xiao Yan often discussed this matter many times without ever reaching an answer. Thus they anxiously listened to Princess Jialu's explanation today. Princess Jialu took another sip of tea, cleared her throat and retold the hopeless love story which began 70 years ago. A handsome lad met a maiden. Thereon he became lovesick, lost his appetite, and became ill. To this very day, he was determined to stay single if he could not have her. It was said the maiden had given General Chongsheng and the ceramics box to the young man. After returning home, he would look at the box while longing for her. Of course, that young man was charming Meng Xiao of Fanyan Valley. Xiao Yan asked, "The young lady brother Meng couldn't marry must be an outsider? If she is alive, they still have a chance. He'd be violating the valley's rules, but that's not such a big deal. I often break our clan's rules too. The elders never could do anything about it. Staring at a cricket day in and day out and dying from lovelornness isn't a man's course of action. What could the demon elders possibly do to the lord of their blue sect?" Fengju thought. Their clan rules were only set for fun. But she agreed with everything else Xiao Yan said. She nodded vigorously and with utter sincerity, told Jialu, "Whose family is the young lady from? What is her name? We can help search for her if that would make the second prince's wish come true. As friends, our worry will lessen too." Jialu took another sip of tea, seemingly touched by their kindness. King Kaiu's queen of the 9-tailed white fox clan, ruler of the East Land, Her Royal Highness Fengju. I'm not sure if you've heard of her? She's the one he loves. Fengju fell over her chair. Xiao Yan dropped his jaw. What? When Fengju grabbed onto Xiao Yan's arm and crawled up, looking at Meng Xiao's drinking profile from 2 tables away, a seed of memory fell to the ground, sprouted and flowered. She finally remembered why the ceramics box seemed so familiar. There was indeed such a story, and it happened 70 years ago. 70 years ago, an old-time friend of Jian's came to visit his 10-mile orchard and by chance met Fengju who came to pick peaches. It was love at first sight. Jian's old friend was ruler of the mountain gods. He reigned over the countless rivers and mountains on the mortal realm. His home was on the divine peak of Zhiyu Mountain in the Northland. His name was Kangyi Shenjun. Kangyi Shenjun did not come from the ancient families from the yore of time. He became master of the mountains due to the recent accomplishments he achieved. For this reason, Jian held great respect for him. In his estimation, he was the best junior deity in recent history. Kangyi Shenjun was a decisive man. Without any hesitation, he asked Jian to visit King Kaiu as his matchmaker. Jian agreed. Surprisingly, his accomplishments and generous character were immediately favored by her father Bai Yi. After Fengju inherited the throne in the East Land, the first thing Bai Yi attended to was finding her a worthy husband to strengthen her position. After countless rounds, his sharp eyes finally landed on Kang Yi. However, Fengju never agreed to this match. Despite her protest, she naturally couldn't win against her father. When Mount Xiu's wedding procession arrived at King Kaiu, her father tied her up and tossed her into the 8-carrier palanquin which would follow the curving road back to her groom's home. Kang Yi Shenjun was kept away on business in the mortal realm at the time. Receiving the bride was a general next in command. Fengju looked out from her palanquin and saw that this general was at least 10 meters tall. Estimating she couldn't win against him, she docilely sat still the entire way. She planned to act once the palanquin reached the palace. She would wreak havoc at that time by refusing to leave her palanquin to marry Kang Yi so the whole world could know. Let's see if her father could force her then. The carriers were expeditious. It only took half a day when they arrived at the foot of Mount Jiu. The serpentine wedding procession was winding its way into the mountain entrance when a terrified cry was heard outside the palanquin. Fengju lifted her curtain and gazed out. The 10-meter-tall general was using a 9-section whip to lash a feeble youngster who was possibly an attendant in the procession. Fengju hurled her golden hairpin to stop the whip and sent her maid to find out what was going on. The truth was quite simple. The young lad did not belong to this particular palace. He somehow joined the procession along the way, wanting to ascend Mount Jiu for unknown reasons. There was a rule at Mount Jiu: if one didn't belong on the mountain, one could not enter its grounds. The rainbow bell rang the moment he crossed the entrance, and he was promptly dragged out and beaten. His legs seemed painfully lashed, blood soaking his trousers. He weakly explained, I became separated from my brother, and as I was looking for him, I saw the wedding procession. I've never seen a foreign wedding before, so I lingered on to watch. I have no other intentions. Fengju looked to the young man who was painfully trembling on the ground in the distance. For the time being, she didn't care whether he was telling the truth or not. If he was really just a kid looking for fun, Mount Jiu was being small-minded. If he was lying, this could work to her advantage when she wreak havoc on Mount Jiu tomorrow. Fengju lifted her curtain and briskly stepped toward the incident. She helped the youngster up and feigned surprise as she spoke. Isn't this Xiao Ming? I thought it was you looking from afar, but your brother should be at Jian's place or back home in Qingqiu. How did you get separated from him? Well, why don't you come with me first? In 2 days, I'll have someone take you back to Qingqiu so you can see your brother. As she helped him up, she cried loudly in further distress, Oh no, how did you get wounded so badly? This won't do. You too. Quick, help young Master Ming into my palanquin. The confused lad was brought away by a group of alarmed servants. By the time he sat firmly inside the palanquin, he still hadn't a single idea what had happened. In Fengju's memory, that youngster was extremely timid. He only sat quietly in the palanquin. Even though his leg wounds were hurting, he bore it until they arrived at Mount Xiu's palace. Seeing his painful gritted face, Fengju took from her sleeve a bamboo cylinder with a red-headed cricket her little uncle had gifted her. Young boys tend to like crickets, perhaps this cricket would take his attention away from the pain. She conjured up a ceramics box and transferred the cricket into it, then conjured another green-headed cricket to fight the red-headed one. The lad widened his eyes, riveted. Seeing that he was interested in this stuff, she gifted them all to him. She hadn't saved him without an ulterior motive. Feeling guilty, she gave him a small present in exchange. The lad blushed and thanked her in a tiny voice, Miss, you are very kind to have helped me. I'll surely repay your kindness one day." After arriving at the mountain summit, Tangqi was led into a private room to rest. The youngster was brought to another room to treat his wounds. Over tea, Tangqi thought of his promise to repay her. What exactly did he come to this mountain for? She had saved him no matter how one looked at it. It was natural for him to repay her. But there was one problem weighing on her mind. She was covered in a bridal veil from beginning to end. Not having seen her face, would he return the favor to the wrong person? While her mind was still in a knot, a servant came in to tell her Kang Yi Shenjun had returned. Tangqi's mind became more knotted. On one hand she had to deal with Kang Yi, on the other hand she had to come up with a way to turn the palace topsy-turvy before the nuptial rites. Both were taking up her brain power. Needing to attend to these two matters first, she had no time to think about the young man she had rescued. From that day on, Tangqi never saw him again. Like a duckweed in a lotus pond, his face had been forgotten in some far corner of her memory. If no wind came to ripple the water surface, this memory would have been sealed away in the years of silence. The young man was but a passer-by among the many passers-by she met in her 30,000 years. After such a long time, despite recalling it now, she couldn't link the timid youngster back then to the charming gentleman today no matter what. 70 years. What exactly had happened in that time which turned Meng Xiao from a timid boy to a charismatic charmer? With hundreds of questions, Tangqi glanced her doubtful eyes again toward Meng Xiao. But the seat where he was sitting a second ago was now empty. A clank sounded on the table, a silver light flashed from the wine flagon. Nothing. Meng Xiao had disappeared. Eyes reddened from alcohol, second Prince Meng Xiao drunkenly grabbed onto Xiao Yan's shoulder. The Bianiaos were known for their sharp hearing. Zhao words to Xiao Yan and Tangqi seemed to have been heard by Meng Xiao, giving him a jolt of gratitude. Really? Does everyone also think I should ignore our clan's rules and courageously go after my love? At this junction, he sighed, truthfully, 6 months ago I didn't want to bury this love any longer, and had wanted to break out of this cell to look for my heart's desire. But the moment I left the city, I was crushed senseless by the two of you. So I thought, it's fate. Fate has declared HRH Tangqi and I aren't destined, and eventually I gave up. His eyes gleamed at Xiao Yan and Tangqi in the room flooded with light. But now with you guys cheering me on like this, one person using himself as an example to break clan rules, the other earnestly helping me look for HRH Tangqi's whereabouts. Tangqi winced and glanced at Xiao Yan while wanting to slap the both of them. She stammered a correction, we suddenly feel we need to think about this more carefully. That idea just now was perhaps not a very good one. She turned to Xiao Yan and winked at him. Brother, you seem regretful about your words. In your opinion, our idea was rather rash and horrible, wasn't it? Xiao Yan caught on to Tangqi's meaning and immediately expressed regret. Right, right. Horrible, absolutely horrible. Voice filled with regret, he went on. Although the elders never punished me, all these years I've felt exceedingly guilty for violating our clan's rules. My heart aches every time I think about it. Princess Zhao stared slack-jawed at the two of them. Meng Xiao looked on in bewilderment. Tangqi supplemented in earnestness, Her Highness Fengju, ahem. Her Highness gifted you the cricket and the ceramics box. Why would you only place your longings onto the cricket? Isn't the box the same? The cricket is now dead, but the box is still here. Isn't this a sign that it's still not yet time to leave everything to look for her? She then coaxed him, if heaven had wanted you to leave everything to look for her, when he called General Chongsheng back, he would have smashed the box as well. But he didn't do that, because it's still not yet time. What do you think, am I right? The bewilderment in Meng Xiao's eyes deepened. A little later he said, your words seem reasonable. But I'm a bit confused by your conclusion. Fengju patiently explained to him, that's because you've been drinking. Your cognition is no longer clear. She continued to explain, say, why don't you rest to sober up? Once your head clears, you'll see that my words make perfect sense. Young Master Meng gave this some thought and decided he agreed. After one whole day of drinking, he finally dismissed the restaurant's servers. Princess Jiaolu and the servants moved him to a guest room in Ziwalixian. Jiaolu let out a sigh of relief when her burden was finally lifted. After everyone left, when they and the two yawning servers were the only ones remaining in the main hall, Xiao Yan, who had been witnessing an intriguing play, gave Fengju a thumbs up and was about to speak when Fengju beat him to it. I have no idea why Meng Xiao likes me. Even if you ask, I won't know what to tell you. Disappointment surfaced on Xiao Yan's face. Fengju carefully gave the room a sweep before telling him, I feel like from the time we stepped into this tavern, someone has been watching me. Isn't that the case? Xiao Yan feigned unease. Those two eyes are lolling on your shoulder right now, smiling to you. Just then, a draft came from behind, raising the hairs on her arms. She started and jumped into Xiao Yan's arms. Xiao Yan patted her back while cackling aloud. Last time I hugged you, this time you hug me. We're even now. Outside Ziwalixian's second-floor balcony stood a shiny green cereus plant. Basking behind the dawn light, its leaves suddenly stirred under a windless sky. A purple silhouette quietly passed by unbeknownst to the two people inside. 7 days later, the long-awaited tournament at last commenced in the swale to the west of the city. In the past, when there were still 4 seasons in Fanyangu, the hillside here was covered in plum trees, so the swale was called Plum Valley. But in the recent 2 centuries, snow and ice had destroyed half of them, and the royal palace eventually converted this area completely into a sports ground. Fengju had been talking animatedly to her fellow classmates from the time she stepped into the arena. Because Daijun had fabricated a case of pneumonia for her 10 days ago so she could be excused from school, her classmates were now surrounding her in admiration to chat, seeing that she was bravely competing the moment she stepped down from her sickbed. Fengju took a chance to glance around the arena. Sure enough, snow stakes greeted her sight. It was the same formation Meng Xiao had shown her. The sharp stakes glinted frighteningly in the foggy morning sun. But after being trained by Daijun all of 10 days, she didn't mind those stakes anymore. She looked to them as though she was watching drifting clouds. Speaking of Meng Xiao, after Dong Hua released her from the force field yesterday, Fengju asked around and heard that he no longer displayed signs of being reckless. He had probably thought things through. She was at ease now that Meng Xiao no longer tortured himself. Fengju followed along the stadium built from pine and cypress wood circling the stage. Benches were already filled with spectators. The tournament only happened once every 10 years, thus it always drew a crowd. Although attendance was also high in previous years, the stadium was spacious enough people could sit comfortably with elbow room in between. Only this year was the stadium so packed, it threatened to crash under the shoving masses at the news that Daijun would also be in attendance. Although Daijun often came to Fanyan Valley to lecture, he was either found in a classroom or a lecture location of choice. Commoners had never had the opportunity to meet the magnificent king. Never once hoping they would get to meet the highest deity of all, the capital was momentarily sent into a rage 3 days after the news of Daijun's attendance hit. Everyone in the clan from nobles to commoners laid out mets to save their place in line. Plum Valley, which had been deserted for 200 years overnight, turned into a bucket of water set over boiling oil. The Bianiao Queen had taken her seat at the top of the stage, but the highest seat of all was still empty, likely reserved for Dong Hua. The queen above and her courtiers below all donned the same reverential expression, to the point of looking stressful at the thought that they would soon be meeting Daijun for drinks while talking swordplay. Per Daijun's disposition, Fengju knew he'd never come on time for these sorts of competition. He'd either be early, or he could be late. Today probably late, but how late, she couldn't guess. This morning as she was about to leave, she wondered if she should stop by his room to remind him. She had only taken 2 steps forward when she took 1 back. Her relationship with Daijun had been rather lukewarm these past several days. Speaking of the day when Dong Hua had cared for her. After returning from Ziwalixian, Fengju reflected and wondered whether everything could have been real. Daijun may have used magic to erase all traces before leaving her room. There being no traces left didn't necessarily mean she was dreaming. For some reason, she felt happy at this thought, but not wanting to pursue further explanation, she quickly decided she should thank Daijun properly. She could add a few decorations to his breakfast pastries, and she must sincerely tell him her thanks. Fengju yawned as she sang, her hands swiftly preparing a sumptuous breakfast. Daijun made a rare exception this morning, however, by not going to breakfast. Still, feeling pleasant despite a tiny disappointment, she brought the meal to his room. Unfortunately, the room was also quiet with no Dong Hua in sight. It was almost time for sword practice, and she brought the Dozua sword to the rear garden. Unexpectedly, Dong Hua was sitting absently under the flowering apricot tree with a book in his hand. Fengju came closer and called his name. Dong Hua raised his head to look at her. His eyes were as placid as the sleeping mountains in the distance. She stood dazedly looking back at him. On a normal basis, if what happened the night before was true, Daijun's eyes should be looking at her with a certain softness, or he should at least inquire after her injuries. She quietly withdrew her smile, feeling she had dreamed a ridiculous dream. What happened last night was only her imagination, nothing had actually happened. They say what you think during the day you'll dream it at night. For her to see this dream now, did it mean she was always thinking of Daijun and eventually made a habit out of it? Utterly disappointed, but uncertain whether at herself or something else, Fengju hung her head and went to the training grounds. Out of the blue, she heard Daijun's voice from behind, "Why must you have that saha fruit?" Frustrated, she didn't care to turn around and replied him perfunctorily, "Since I never had it before, I just wanted to try it, I guess. Daijun became silent for a while, then asked another perplexing question, will you use it to make pastry? Fengju didn't know how to answer him. The saha fruit was used to revive the dead. Would its power be affected if she made pastries out of it? She hadn't thought of such things before. Maybe. Then, Daijun asked yet another perplexing question. Yan Chaiwu likes pastries with saha filling these days. Fengju was confused. Xiao Yan. There might have been a time when Yan Chaiwu told her something similar, that if they obtained the saha fruit, she should make a pastry and split it in two. She confusedly looked into Dong Hua's fathomless eyes and continued to vaguely answer him, he might. But he doesn't eat ones with mung bean nor red bean flavored with ginger. She then mumbled to herself, he's such a fussy eater. Out of the blue, a gust of cold wind blew by, turning the pages of the book Daijun had just laid down on the marble table. He frowned as he placed his hand on it. Fengju didn't know whether he was satisfied with her answer or not, but he did not say more afterwards. The next several days, Daijun seemed more and more unusual. He looked as though there was something on his mind. Fengju didn't understand the cause at first, then she finally figured it out after days of pondering. She had forgotten Daijun traded places with Xiao Yan and moved to Jiafeng Yuan so he could use her to provoke Jiahun. But Jiahun didn't become upset as he had wanted, so he had been lingering around longer. Not only that, she counted the days on her fingers and it had been 4 or 5 days since he last saw the princess. Daijun must miss her. Nonetheless, this was all caused by his careless planning to begin with. By using a force field to seal Jiafeng Yuan, he made it impossible for Jiahun, who had insufficient cultivation, to visit him. But if he were to lift the force field now, he would be losing his face. This was likely what was giving Daijun distress. This was why he had been losing his mind these past few days. On the night Fengju figured everything out and went to persuade Dong Hua to lift the force field, she considered the possibility that Daijun wouldn't want the world to know his feelings and would prefer to keep his relationship with Princess Jiahun a secret. Thus she cleverly said to him, "Your Majesty, let's get rid of this force field so our friends can come visit us sometimes. It will ease our worry as well as our friends." A perfect plan, don't you think? Daijun heeded her suggestion and in that very same night drew another force field over the old one. Jiafeng Yuan was now enclosed in an even tighter case. Not only Xiao Yan, even 10 Xiao Yans would have a difficult time making a dent in this shield. Thereafter, Dong Hua became even more taciturn. Why a cold war all of a sudden, Fengju couldn't really understand. Today was snowless with a clear blue sky and floating clouds. It was a mild-weathered day. The contestants had all paired up, now waiting for Dong Hua Daijun to arrive so they may start. Per the tournament's rules, winners of the first round would duel in the next round. When 3 people remained, they would compete for first, second, and third prize. Fengju's first round opponent was a dandy fellow who did not know martial arts. She didn't mind him at all. It being early, everyone brought their swords out to clean. She also took the Dozua sword from her sleeve and pretended to wipe it. She glanced toward the stage and saw the little Do holding onto the railings. He jumped up and down while waving to her as if he was afraid she wouldn't notice him. Standing behind him was Lord Liensong, who was smiling pleasantly. They stood among a crowd, having likely snuck in to watch. Fengju attentively watched the doe's moving lips and guessed he was telling her, Fengju Jija, be careful not to disturb the baby in your stomach. If you feel pain in the middle of the match, you have to stop immediately and leave the arena. Do you understand? Fengju's hand twitched. The doe's sword almost flew straight to where they stood. Donghua Daijun at long last arrived by the end of the dragon hour, 9 a.m. Contrary to everyone's imagination, which involved his majestic arrival on jetting clouds or roaring thunder, Daijun very simply walked on foot into the arena. At the end of the first 100 paces, he placidly climbed up the wooden steps to the terrace. The queen and her officials who had already sat themselves down did not imagine Donghua to arrive in such a fashion. In their mind, whether Donghua arrived on clouds or wind, he'd still descend from above. At that time, the queen would lead her subjects and prostrate along the aisle leading up to the highest seat to welcome him, a very ceremonious reception. But right now, Daijun was still at the bottom of the terrace, whereas they were already seated high above. How disrespectful this all was! Horrified, the queen led her subjects in shifting back into their original bird form and secretly flying to the back of the stadium. They then turned back into humans as they circled back out to prostrate behind Donghua and simultaneously chanted, "Your subjects welcome your arrival, Your Majesty." Donghua Daijun had once reigned over the universe. Of course he more than deserved to have clans' rulers subject themselves as his liege. Civilians on the stands stared wide-eyed at this scene. The rowdy arena hushed in an instant. There was only the occasional creaking of wooden planks underneath Donghua's feet. The king did not stop, starting from the judging official. All four sides which had been quiet unanimously knelt on their knees. "We welcome your arrival, Your Majesty," the chant echoed across the space. Daijun continued to serenely mount the terrace, heading straight to the highest seat. After he was seated, he unhurriedly waved his arm to say, "What are you kneeling for? I'm a bit late. When is the tournament starting?" The queen, her officials, and subjects bowed once more before rising. Fengju rose with everyone else. When she glanced in Donghua's direction, she saw that he was also casually gazing at her. A slight pause, then just as casually turned away. Fengju was rendered somewhat wonderstruck. Of course she quite knew of Donghua's achievements and reputation. But when she first met him, Donghua had already sought seclusion. His daily activities involved making incense, firing ceramics, fishing, or ordinary hobbies of the likes which gave off an impression of approachability. She hadn't thought far into the fact that he had once been the regal sovereign of the 6 realms. So this was a sovereign's aura. It was the first time Donghua felt unreachably far away and high above. Sadly, this realization only came to her now. Had she realized this earlier when she was young, she would have quit chasing after him. There wouldn't have been so much pain to endure. She was quite brave in those days to think of it. But, for the record, for someone like Daijun to harbor worldly feelings and love a woman was also a strange matter to contemplate. She raised her gaze to Jaihun in her pure white dress, who remained with him wherever he went. What's more, to see him put in so much effort only for this woman was an even stranger thing. Drums pounded thunderously. Chosen by the queen to preside over the tournament, Master Jihan impressively came onto the tall podium set next to the dueling arena. On behalf of the queen, he read a commencement speech, went over the regulations, and afterward lighted a timing incense with the help of 2 attendants. The competition then officially began. Another deafening burst of drum resounded. Competitors stood in 2 rows with their swords as they entered the arena under the urging drum roll. When the signal sounded, swords immediately whirled in the wind, producing blinding flashes of the blades. At once, hapless individuals started to fall from the stakes onto the snowy forest. With only 2 moves, Fengju was able to force her opponent to tumble off the stake. From then on, she could only sit on the side to watch the rest of the match. Although her teacher had screened out many applicants, there was still a multitude of competitors left. In the first round, many perfectly alive contenders were forced to fall to an unfortunate defeat. The incense burned fast. After 1 round of incense, only a third remained in the arena, 26 as her teacher counted, to be specific. There was no intermission. Drums pounded again and the second round began. Because Fengju had sat on the side to watch from half a round ago, her legs were slightly numb when she stood up. But with a fully rested mind, in 3 moves her opponent was knocked off once again. Because there were less people crowding the stakes, the fencing was more precise coming from everyone this round. It was also a good thing for spectators in the stands. Little by little, they were able to see more clearly, and cheers occasionally rang forth in the arena. Because the Bianiao clan wasn't very longevu, they aged sooner as well. Fengju's classmates were no more than 100 years old. Even if they had practiced since their infancy, they could not have practiced for more than 1 century. They were no competition for her 20,000 years of swordsmanship. Dong Hua was right. She only had to walk naturally on the stakes and the saha fruit was without a doubt hers. Although the final round wasn't confined by the incense's timing, incense was still burned to keep track of when the last 3 remained and to use for future reference if sword fighting was still the competition of choice. But at this time, the entire stadium watched in surprise when 25 people already lay sprawled out like dumplings on the snowy ground below the stakes while the incense was still burning. Atop the stake formation pointing to the sky like jade-white bamboos, only one stood tall. It was Fengju. Inside and out, the arena became shrouded in silence. Then cheering roars erupted. Throughout the years, it was very rare to witness such one-sided result. With her sword in hand, Fengju sighed in relief. She'd won. The saha fruit was hers. Those 10 days of torture from Donghua was worth it after all. She flew down from the snow stakes and saluted her sprawling classmates, thanking them for going easy on her. She took time to glance to the terrace where Donghua was leaning back against his chair as he casually looked down on the chaotic battleground below, his thoughts indecipherable. He had helped her to victory but he wasn't giving her even one tiny supportive look. Fengju was secretly disappointed, but the elation of gaining the saha fruit quickly took over her disappointment. The little Do and Lord Liansong made their way through the crowd to congratulate her. Fengju held back her joy and politely answered back as she heard teacher Jihan announced the results on the stage. Through her teacher's booming voice, Fengju heard her name, heard her prize was a basket of peaches personally picked by the Heavenly Queen, second prize and third prize were a magical sword and a jade bottle with some sort of special use respectively. She did not hear her teacher mention anything about a saha fruit. In the frigid wind, Lord Liansong waved his fan as comprehension dawned upon him. No wonder Donghua hasted to look for me last night, saying he must bring back a basket of peaches. So this was what it was for. Then he furrowed his brow. How strange these Bianiaos are. Did they only decide what the first prize would be the night before? Now he smiled. But these are really the best peaches. Normally, I'd have to beg my mother for some. When they are brought to Jai Feng Yuan, please have a feast so we can all enjoy them. Fengju woodenly moved her lips. Right. She looked up to the stage. Everyone had left. The little doe innocently asked, "Then can I bring 2 back for my parents?" Lian Songjun answered him, "I don't think it's right for you to eat some then bring more back." The doe thought for a moment and countered, "Then can't you just take it as though I eat all 3 of them?" Lian Songjun raised his fan and smiled privately. Fengju forced a smile. "I'm not interested in these peaches, I'll give you my share." Then she turned and left. After 2 steps, she carelessly ran into a snow stake. As though she was reminded of something, she turned back and said, "I feel a little sick. When they bring the peaches over, will your highness or Ali host a feast and invite Meng Xiao, Xiao Yan, and Zhao Lu over to enjoy them?" The doe tugged at Lian Song's sleeve. "What's wrong with Fengju Jija?" Lord Liansong slowly folded his fan. There must have been a problem. Drifting her way out of Plum Valley, meeting her sight was a vast field of white snow. On it was rampageous footprints left behind by the spectators leading back to the imperial city. Fengju took a deep breath, cold air seeping into the depth of her organs. Xiao Yan said it was best to visit Ziwalixian when one wasn't in a good mood. The sadness didn't go away once you sobered up, but at least for a short while you could forget it all. Jihan hadn't been warm to Xiao Yan these days. His words were depressing, but there was some truth in them. As she was heading toward the city, while searching in her sleeves she discovered she had forgotten to bring drink money in her haste this morning. Fengju stood dazed in the middle of the fork. She could not think of where else to go besides Ziwalixian. Now things were apparent. Donghua had replaced the saha fruit with a basket of peaches. He should know how much she wanted the fruit, he should also see the effort she had put in for it. But on the entire way back, she could not come up with why he had wanted to switch the prize. Perhaps she should go ask him herself. If he wasn't in great need of this fruit, maybe she could plead with him to reward it back to her. Feeling bitter at this point, she lifted her heel to head for Jai Feng Yuan when she heard a melodic voice calling out to her from behind, "Princess Juji, please wait." Fengju turned her head. The person striding toward her was indeed Jihan. The last time they met was at the lavish feast she had paid for 10 days ago. She could still vaguely recall that Jihan's mood wasn't very good then. She had seemed a little unhappy. On the contrary, she seemed cheerful and spirited today, and there was a slight resemblance to the young woman who came to Taichan Palace 300 years ago. Fengju glanced past the princess. Jihan's eyes followed. She lightly smiled. "Teacher isn't here. I came to look for you without his knowing. Because I feel guilty to have unavoidably taken what you wanted, I came to say sorry." Upon catching Fengju's confused expression, she continued, "To be honest, I also wanted to have this year's saha fruit from Jiayu Spring, so last night I came to ask teacher for it. He switched it for me with the Heavenly Queen's peach basket. When I saw Yan Chaiwu a moment ago, he told me you only participated in the tournament for this saha fruit. No matter how I think about this, I have wronged you this time. Tangqi now understood. So this was what happened, it all made sense now. But why did Jihan especially come to tell her this? Tangqi quietly watched Jihan. Even though Tangqi didn't like her that much, in her memory Jihan wasn't a bad person. But did she really come here to apologize out of guilt, or did she merely wait for an opportune time to deliberately disconcert her? Tangqi could not decide for now. Jihan had always been kind to her, but she knew the princess wasn't very fond of her either. Nonetheless, what important use did she have for the saha fruit? Was it as urgent as herself? If Jihan didn't need it too urgently, and if she genuinely felt sorry, then, she lifted her eyes and said, "Can you let me have half of this saha fruit? I can trade anything you want for it." Jihan was stunned momentarily, as though she couldn't believe Tangqi stood there for so long only to propose such a thing. Her lips curved slightly. "Princess Zhuge, the reason I came to apologize to you was because I cannot share that saha fruit with you, not even half." Jihan had always been refined in her manners. As the eldest princess of the demon clan, each of her words and actions was befitting of her status. She remembered Jihan always spoke cordial, gentle words. She never heard her say unkind things. So this was how she looked when she uttered unkindness. She hadn't come to apologize after all. Jihan approached closer, her melodic voice sank low, and with great calmness, her eyes softly danced. "Additionally, there is a presumptuous request I'd like to ask of your highness. From now on, please stay away from my teacher." Tangqi now comprehended the situation. This was probably the real reason Jihan came to see her for. The apology was only an excuse to keep her here. Recently, she stopped paying attention to what other people say. She had also just left the arena after undergoing some emotional shocks. Feeling weary, she took a step backward away from her and said, "I'm afraid I don't know why you're hurting me by saying this. If you won't share the saha fruit, there's not much more we can say." Jihan ceased to smile. Her voice was without humor now. "I knew such words would surely displease you, but I say them for your highness's own good. My teacher's gaze toward you has changed these days. Your heart must be moved." She gave Tangqi another glance and continued, "I don't know how long teacher had lived for. In his infinite life, he is often bored in loneliness. He loves seeking new things. You're smart and pretty, so it's only natural you should feel he is attracted to you. But he merely sees you as a new playmate. Going any further will only bring you pain." Without letting Tangqi have a chance to react, she lowered her head and added, "You probably think I'm saying this because I myself love him." She paused. "I'll be honest, I was once betrothed to him. But in my ignorant youth, I missed out on a wonderful match. Throughout 300 years, teacher had never once abandoned me. He made me realize who was the true person I should entrust my happiness to. Your arrival made me realize my own feelings. His special attention to you indeed pains me greatly. That was why I asked him for the saha fruit, to test my importance in his heart. I, too, have been afraid whether we would be able to continue our fate which had been broken in the past, but he didn't think twice before giving it to me." After a moment of reflection, Jihan finished, "I want us to be everlasting. Princess, please don't get in between the two of us." A long time after Jihan had left, Fengju was still rooted to the same spot. Wind grew more fiercely on the outskirt of town, blasting away even the sunlight. The sky was becoming opaque. What did she say when Jihan left? She might have politely said something along the line of "I wish you and His Majesty the King an everlasting ending." While Jihan was expressing her grief with heartfelt words, Fengju's face was utterly cold. She didn't even pay attention to how Jihan had replied to her afterwards. It was possible Jihan had hid the light in her eyes, as she also politely said she had always known Princess Juji to be a wise person. She had been a very wise person indeed. In order to have the saha fruit, she spent so much effort and endured so many bitterness to ultimately lose against a few of Jihan's ordinary words to Dong Hua. She felt aggrieved, but what could she do? Deep down, she understood that Jihan was the one Dong Hua loved. Recently, they were having conflicts which they had not been able to resolve. Using the saha fruit, Dong Hua had hoped he could soothe Jihan and thereby resolve their conflicts. His action wasn't excessive at all. Still having consideration for her, Dong Hua went to the Heavenly Queen and asked for a basket of peaches. At least he was thinking about his junior. She had no reason to feel wronged. When Xiao Yan said Dong Hua paid attention to her because he wanted to be her friend, he had overrated her. Jihan was right. Daijun only wanted a new playmate in his momentary loneliness. Jihan's words were candid, but she was being truthful. Feeling a stab at her pride, Fengju had wanted to refute but didn't know what to say. All this seemed to have verified the idea that Daijun was using her to provoke Jihan. If Daijun could hear Jihan's words to her just now, he would be overjoyed. It meant she had brought them together, so she had been quite useful. Jihan said she wanted an eternity with Daijun. Was that not also his wish? If they reconciled, he should have no need for her anymore. Naturally, he would move out of Jai Feng Yuan and go back to Jihan's side. Naturally, he didn't need her to take care of his meals anymore. Naturally, he also wouldn't need to drag her out for practice on the snow stakes anymore. Then, this was actually a good thing. She didn't know why, but she felt even more saddened upon her understanding. Cold wind picked up. She squinted her eyes and raised her sleeves to rub them. When she opened her eyes again, the endless snowfield became even more nebulous. Fengju sat forlornly on the side of the road for a while. When her heart calmed down, she thought once more of the saha fruit. She felt she should still return to Jai Feng Yuan again. She had put in too much effort for it. Jihan didn't want to share the fruit with her, but it might work if she asked Dong Hua. Dong Hua could coax Jihan with his many other precious treasures. But for her, she absolutely must have the saha fruit in order to save Yeking tea. Even if Dong Hua had only treated her as a temporary friend, she felt she had done a good job of being one. If he agreed to let her have the fruit, she could continue be his spare playmate. She'd even do whatever it was he wanted. There was a second when she also felt it was a demeaning thing to do, but up to this day, she hadn't been able to find any other way. If crying and begging didn't work, she would grab hold of his sleeve and sob wretchedly. Then again, Dong Hua may not care for her tears. Apart from the few people he cared about, the rest didn't mean anything to him. Like when he freely gave the saha fruit to Jihan, he undoubtedly didn't care about her sincerity and efforts. She knew this side of him too well. Some time later, Fengju wiped her eyes and stood up to head back to Jifeng Yuan. She tripped on a pebble on the way. Jifeng Yuan's gates were wide open. Standing outside, she stared down into the clear stream and fixed her garments. When she saw her reddened eyes, she picked up some snow by the bank and pressed onto them. Then she closed her eyes and sat on the ground for a while. When she stared back into the water and saw no more redness, she made sure everything was presentable one last time before turning into the courtyard. The yard was exceptionally quiet. On the pond surface remained a few withering lotus leaves. Usually, Dong Hua would be resting in the back garden or fishing by the pond at this time. She took a deep breath, and as she went straight to the rear garden, a blue-robed person waltzed out from behind the arching doorway. Xiao Yan pushed aside the draping green vines above the door, surprised to see her. He didn't have a chance to speak when she had asked first, "Is Daijun inside?" Daijun wasn't inside. Xiao Yan frowned and told her with a scratchy voice, "You're just seconds late." I's Face had carried an injured fox with him back to Zhikongtian for treatments. Apparently, he found a dying fox on his way back from Plum Valley. He used his own fairy energy to keep it alive, fed it an elixir, and took it back to heaven. In my opinion, I's Face doesn't seem the generous type. It suddenly arouses a little compassion from him now because he probably thinks it looks like his lost fox from all those years ago. Bitterly, he went on, "Just this little act of kindness moved Jihun. If it wasn't because she didn't have enough cultivation and could not leave Fanyan Valley, she'd have left with him a long time ago." His face was now full of sorrow. Jihun went to see him off. "I didn't go along because I didn't want to see him. I waited here for you so I can bring you out for drinks. I think I's Face might not even come back for another 3 or 4 days. Is there anything pressing you want from him?" He then remarked in newfound recognition, now that I's Face had finished everything here, perhaps he won't come back. He rambled on and on for such a long time, Fengju didn't catch on to everything. She only heard part of what he said. "Did you say Daijun won't come back for at least several days?" 3 or 4 days were too long. She heard from Meng Xiao the royal tradition regarding the picking of asaha fruit. The sacred tree was nurtured by heaven. Like magical grass in Yangzhou by the East Sea protected by guarding beasts, the saha fruit was guarded by 4 pythons under the stone pillars. Before she could pick the fruit, the queen would have to use the blood from her fingertip to drop into the pythons' bellies. After they went to sleep, she would be able to near the tree. For this reason, she learned that on the night the competition ended, the queen would drop her blood into the bellies of the serpents, then wait until the 2nd hour of the night before she could come to take the fruit. Tomorrow night, or at most the day after tomorrow, the saha fruit would be sent to Jihun's hands. It seems asking for Dong Hua's help was impossible now. Was there any other way? Should she beg Jihun again? Fengju was startled at this thought. She must be at her wit's end to contemplate such a humiliating thing. If she begged Dong Hua, he might take pity and let her have it. She didn't think he disliked her. But if she were to beg Jihun, no matter how pitiably, she wasn't certain the princess could be moved. She was the thorn in Jihun's eyes, she had made it very clear. If she was a simple little fox, her dignity mattered little. But she was ruler of the East Land, queen of King Kaiyu. She could not let King Kaihu's name be dragged down by other people. She couldn't do this kind of thing. Since this was the case, she might as well try her luck sneaking into Jiayu Spring before the saha fruit was picked. When this idea flashed in her head, she suddenly realized, when there was nowhere else to go, this, in fact, was a clear path, and right now she had nowhere else to go. More than anyone, she knew how dangerous it was to sneak into Jiayu Spring. If there was a choice, she wouldn't want to risk her life either, but there was a kindness she owed Ye Qingti. For so many years, she hadn't been able to repay him. She constantly bore this debt on her shoulders and often felt burdened with guilt. Incidentally, she fell into Fanyan Valley and came upon a miraculous opportunity to save him. She didn't want to let this chance go. It wasn't that she hadn't considered safer methods to obtain the saha fruit, it wasn't as if she didn't try. But sometimes it was hard to predict the ways of the heavens. Perhaps because Ye Qingti had sacrificed his own life to save her in the past, heaven didn't think it fair should she return the favor so easily. There must be a life-endangering challenge in exchange for there to be justice. Heaven had always operated under heaven's ways. After thinking so, she didn't bother mulling further into it. She looked to the sky. If she wanted to steal the saha fruit, it had to be tonight. When he saw her go right past him into the arching doorway, Xiao Yan questioningly asked, "You're not going to Ziwalixian for drinks with me?" She undecidedly asked to do it another day, but in her mind, she thought it would still depend on her luck tonight. If her luck was poor, she wasn't sure when another day would be. Xiao Yan sighed that she had no sincerity and, in a few steps, reached the exit of the courtyard. As he was about to leave, she called for him to stop. Xiao Yan happily turned around and said, "I knew you'd be a good friend and want to accompany me." Feng Zhu observed Xiao Yan from head to toe and told him, "Another day. I just felt that since we have been friends for a period of time, I wanted to take a better look at you." Xiao Yan scratched his head confusedly. "You seem to have something important to do, that's fine then." "Right, I heard Ziwalixian got a new chef recently. Should I bring some signature dishes back for you?" She nodded. "All right, but I eat bland these days. Tell them not to make it too spicy." It was a moonless night. A few stars dotted the sky. The secret tunnel Xiao Yan created half a month ago could still be used. After getting lost last time, she learned from experience and carefully followed along the path straight to Jiayu Spring this time. Feng Zhu sighed to herself. Indeed, everything in life was karmic and connected. This was the fate which Buddhism talked of. Jiayu Spring was a crystal-clear blue stream. The saha tree standing on the bank resembled a cluster of billowing cloud. In the middle of that cloud was a gleaming red fruit. The 4 pillars stood quietly around it. It was uncertain when the 4 pythons would break free from the stone. Dong Hua once asked if she was afraid to go out during the night because she had fallen into a snake nest as a child. Yes, she was afraid of the night, and out of all animals and beasts, she was especially afraid of snakes. But standing here right now, she didn't feel that same fear. Fear arose when people had something they worried about. On the way here, however, she already thought of the worst-case scenario. Everything else was now but an ephemeral cloud to her. This spot was about 100 meters away from the saha tree. It was impossible for her to defeat the pythons in a distance of 100 meters, then take the saha fruit. Her uncle-in-law, Lord Yehua, had also gone to Yingzhou in the East Sea to steal magical grass. Despite his remarkable cultivation, he lost an arm to the guarding beasts. She didn't have the capability to go this head-on route. She planned to transfer her 30,000 years' worth of fairy energy onto the protective barrier. Let the pythons attack on the outside all they want, she would only single-mindedly barrel ahead for the saha fruit. After she picked it, she would turn around to fight the pythons. This would test her speed. If she was fast, the barrier with her fairy energy might buy her enough time for the fruit. Although she was using up all her energy now, she could always cultivate it again. It wasn't of great consequence. But if she wasn't fast, the shield wouldn't be able to hold out long enough for her to escape from the python's territory. It was hard to say what the consequences would be at that point. At the same time, Dong Hua had said his Tiankang cage was still with her. Although it was a magical object which could only be controlled by its master, since it was on her body, it should automatically protect her in dangerous moments. No matter how dire the situation became, she wouldn't lose her life. There was nothing overly grave to worry about. Night wind howled. Fengju cast a spell from her fingers and chanted an incantation to conjure up a protective barrier around her body. She suddenly wondered what would happen if she somehow got the saha fruit, but Jihan became upset and Dong Hua made her return it. She wasn't certain if Jihan would do this or not. But even so, she would never return it. Worse comes to worst, she would break off relations with Dong Hua. Yet she felt weak at this thought. It would be nice if Dong Hua could be a fraction as good to her as he was to Jihan. She didn't need much, just a fraction. How good would it be if all she also had to do was persuade Dong Hua to let her have it? But if this didn't happen 300 years ago, 300 years later it'd still be a fantasy. Fengju couldn't help but be saddened by that futile dream. She inhaled deeply and looked out to the quiet night sky full of perils. Then she closed her eyes and transferred all of her fairy energy into the protective shield. She was beginning to fade away along with her draining divine source. Her face paled gradually as the protective shield turned from red to blinding gold. This golden flash of light shot toward Jiayu Spring. The ground instantly shook, mountains rattled, wind howled like demonic cries. 4 pythons leapt out from the stone pillars. Their mouths opened wide as they breathed out venomous smoke. Long sharp fangs stabbed at the golden light. The flash of light bore the pythons' attacks and kept barreling ahead for Jiayu Spring. The 4 pythons' eyes glared angrily. They hissed to the sky, fire and lightning blasting from their bloody red mouth. In waves, they shot out at the golden light. The golden light's speed gradually slowed down, but it was still dodging, still sprinting toward the saha tree. When it reached the tree, it instantly hit into the tree's thick canopy. Afraid they could harm the sacred tree, the python's assault grew less offensive. They could only stay outside while thrashing their tails furiously, capsizing the water inside the spring. Fengju's lips were pale. She wiped cold sweat from her temple, then tremblingly picked the fruit off its tree. The enraged pythons attacked the thief. She hastened to stick close to the tree to avoid their fangs. Her fairy barrier was starting to crack under their onslaught. They were more menacing than she had imagined. It would be difficult when she turned back out. Although fire and lightning from the pythons' mouths were only pounding on the shield, her body still couldn't escape from damage. There was no wounds, but her bones and tendons ached all over. Fengju never thought such pain was possible. Now that she got the saha fruit, the pythons hissed in increasing fury. They attacked more fiercely when she turned back. As black clouds pulled in, thunder and lightning struck down onto her protective shield. Fengju's body experienced a burst of sharp pain as she felt the barrier cracking around her. Her body hurt as if it was cut by blades, her feet began to slow. The barrier changed from gold to red, then gradually weakened to a silvery light. 10 more steps and she'd be out of the python's land. Suddenly, she heard a loud explosion. The magic shield had shattered into pieces. Fengju looked up in fright. A lightning bolt was aiming for her head from above. Lurking behind the voltage was the python's burning red eyes, which resembled 2 flaming fireballs. Sharp venomous fangs dove at her. Fengju instinctively dodged. The fangs only grazed her sleeve, but she was thrown 10 meters backward from the wind force. In the distance, another large fireball was now shooting from the python's mouth, swerving in her direction. All of her 30,000 years of cultivation was now depleted. What she had left would not be able to withstand the attack. In this second, she thought it was the end. Her heart plunged into the snowy abyss. She closed her eyes and waited when, only 1 meter from reaching her, the fireball suddenly ricocheted backward. It was the Tiankeng cage. At the very last moment, it indeed came to her rescue once again. She struggled to get up. Several meters in front of her again emerged a python. She held the magic fruit and took a few steps forward, then instantly retreated. The Tiankeng cage couldn't follow her fast enough. She realized at this time the cage's magic could act like a fairy barrier, but it could not move with one's body as the barrier did. The ground surrounding Jiayu Spring shook violently. In an instant, there were people swarming out to watch. She had thought about the consequences if the saha fruit were to be lost. Likely Dong Hua, Jihan, and Meng Xiao would guess it was her doing, but they wouldn't be able to do anything without evidence. But at this time, if she continued to stay inside the Tiankeng cage to keep her life, everyone would be able to see her trapped inside the matrix. When things reached that point, war between the Bianiaos and King Kaihu was hard to avoid. She must leave this enchanted zone at any cost. Hopefully, she would be able to make the 10-pace-long escape. She must remain unafraid. She only needed her eyes to stay bright, her mind to stay clear. Then, if she used the last scrap of her energy, she didn't believe she couldn't escape. Fengju encouraged herself. Her eyes began to blur from sweat, but she calmly observed the 4 pythons' movements. After continuously attacking the marble-strong Tiankeng cage, the pythons were also tired out as they took a second to breathe. Fengju seized this opportunity to abruptly dart out from the cage. Like a flash, she sprinted to the matrix's border. There remained only a couple more steps to get out. Her feet suddenly tripped. The python's thunderous hiss boomed over her head. The last thing she saw was a raging flame, which then strangely extinguished in the python's burning red eyes. Those blood-red eyes suddenly welled up with tears. Having never seen a python's tears before, she watched in stun for some time. In the void, an extremely low and cold voice called out chokingly, "Your Highness Aranya." She clearly heard it to be the sound of a python. Fengju had listened haphazardly to the tale of Aranya, but she never gave much thought over it. With this voice, coldness started to take over her body. Pain increasingly spread all over her, ending in a tearing shock. From the time she stepped into the python's territory, pain never once let her go. But she endured it without uttering one word. At last, she could no longer bear the agony and let out a cry. Her consciousness gradually gave way to the excruciating bout of pain. For Tangqi Palace's housekeeper, Zonglin, there was a worry weighing on his mind lately. His Majesty was acting curiously ever since he returned from Fanyan Valley. Of course, Daijun had always been an eccentric person. Zonglin himself could not fully understand the king despite being next to him for so many years. But this time, the peculiarity was quite different from other times. For example, he held a book in his hand dazedly for half a day without turning the page. For example, he forgot to boil water and instead used cold water to steep his tea. For example, he held chopsticks in his hand without knowing what he was eating during an entire meal. There was even one time when His Majesty asked him what would be the best way to off someone so that no one would notice his absence. Zonglin was a principled fairy all of his life. Of course he couldn't offer a good advice regarding this. Daijun seemed disappointed. He could tell Daijun had lost his mind somewhere these days. Lord Liansong came to look for Daijun the afternoon after he returned to Tangqi Palace. Liansong often frequented Tangqi Gong, so his visit was nothing new. But Lord Liansong, who had always carried a carefree expression on his face, was wearing a solemn look today. It had been a long time since Zonglin saw him like this. The last time might have been when Chengyu Yuanjun ascended to heaven more than 400 years ago. The spirit fox Daijun brought back with him was carried back by 2 young servants from the doctor's home today. Under the doctor's miraculous ministration, its condition was no longer very serious, and it was now looking at its savior full of admiration. This was a fox which only recently was able to take the human form. In reality, Daijun wasn't a merciful person who readily saved others. Zonglin was also puzzled as to why he had rescued a fox this time. But looking at its red fur, he suddenly remembered the lively baby fox who once lived here 300 years ago. It was likely an act of kindness springing from thoughts of the past. Although the baby fox in those days couldn't shapeshift, and its fur was quite ordinary, its fairy energy was much stronger than all the ones that could change form. Daijun especially adored it. Throughout the years, he could tell Daijun loved that fox more than any other. But it got lost for some reason. Its fate with Daijun was probably too fragile. Zonglin looked to the distance absently and sighed. He was about to head to the main hall to take care of things when he suddenly discovered Liansong, who had left but now returned, standing in front of him. Liansong raised his fan and asked, "Right, is Donghua in the garden, the main hall, or his bedchamber? I'm too lazy to take the wrong route." Zonglin always knew exactly where Daijun was. Liansong headed straight for Donghua's bedchamber, not a single one of his steps wasted. At this time, Donghua had arranged a game of chess, but there wasn't a single stone on the board. He had been holding a stone in his hand for some time without placing it down. Upon a closer look, he didn't seem to be thinking of the game, he seemed more like his mind had left him. Behind the wall screen was a small nest. A red fox was timidly poking its head out, its glassy dark eyes abashedly looking at Dai Jun. Lian Song came for a reason. He walked straight to Dong Hua. The king woke from his stupor and motioned him to sit. Lian Song went to the most comfortable-looking chair and cut to the chase. The Saha fruit of the Bianiao clan can bring back the flesh and bones of a dead mortal this year. Have you heard of this? Dong Hua placed a black stone on the board, then picked up a white one and absent-mindedly replied, I have. Why? Lian Song furrowed his brow. I heard Fengju once married a mortal to repay some sort of debt. After he died, she returned to King Kaihu. Although Siming said there was nothing between the two, it feels strange if you connect it to the Saha fruit. So I called Siming over to Yuanji Palace this morning for a drink. Siming can't hold his liquor. After only a few bottles, he told me even the things I didn't ask. It has to do with you. The white stone fell to the board. It's normal for Xiao Bai's business to be related to me, said Dong Hua. He then indicated for Lian Song to go on. Lian Song hesitated before continuing. According to Siming, Fengju traded her fur with the Black Demon Lord, Nichuan, in order to help you. After coming into possession of her fur, he let her borrow a temporary red coat to wear. He studied Dong Hua as he told him. This event happened precisely 305 years ago. Dong Hua was seemingly surprised. The hand which placed the stone on the chessboard remained frozen in its spot. Do you mean to say the baby fox I lost was Xiao Bai? Lian Song poured more tea, took a sip, and went on. I heard you saved her life once when she was young. Thereafter, she could not forget you. More than 700 years ago when Taichan Palace was looking for helpers, she asked Siming to bring her into your palace as a maidservant. But for some reason, you never paid any attention to her. Later when she heard you were imprisoned inside the wicked lotus sphere, she went to save you and turned into the baby fox that stayed by your side, likely hoping she could move your heart. But afterward, you intended to marry Jihan. At this point, he glanced to Dong Hua who was enduring emotional shocks and hesitatingly continued, is it true that before your wedding with Jihan, she made Jihan injured and you ordered Zonglin to lock her up, then neglected her for a long time? After seeing Dong Hua frowningly nodded, he went on, it was said that Zonglin took pity on her and let her out. After which she was tortured by Jihan's snow lion and almost lost her life. Luckily, she was saved by Siming. When Siming was drunk, he lamented that she was gravely injured at that time. It took 3 days of bed rest in his estate for her to wake up. But you didn't care at all, didn't go to look for her, thus she was heartbroken and went back to King Kaihu. Then he resumed lamenting, no wonder you searched every corner from heaven to earth but still could not find her. It had felt strange to me too, how she had gone missing without a trace. Then he added, I mulled over these things and could guess you were not aware of any of them. Your relationship seems to be going well these days, but there may still be misunderstandings Fengju has toward you. Dai Jun, who rarely showed emotions, was now rubbing his temple apprehensively. Lian Song looked at him in surprise and asked, what's wrong? Dong Hua's voice sounded different from usual. You're right. She must still hate me. I'm thinking about what to do. I also heard a couple of things about the Bianiao Academy's tournament which took place yesterday. The prize for first place was supposed to be the saha fruit, but you switched it for a basket of peaches at the last minute? When the prize was announced, Fengju didn't look too well. He glanced at the small fox poking its head from behind the wall screen and said, "I'll take care of this little fox for now. You should go see her, I'm afraid something will go wrong." The hand that was rubbing his temple stopped as he gazed up in puzzlement. Did Xiao Bai look unwell? Lian Song waved his hand to say, "I'm not really sure either." Then he smiled again and glanced at Dong Hua. "I can usually guess a woman's mind, but your Xiao Bai, honestly, is hard to guess. She just seems very upset right now, so I want you to quickly go take a look, perhaps." He hadn't finished when they heard noises outside. They had only gotten on their feet when the bedroom's door was pushed down in a loud crash. Yan Chaiwa was standing at the entrance, mad with rage. "How despicable! Fengju is trapped inside the serpent formation with her life on the line, and you two are still sitting here playing chess and viewing foxes." Lord Liansong momentarily didn't understand what was happening and froze from the shock of being berated. Dong Hua understood immediately. But he ignored Yan Chaiwa's condemnation, furrowed his brow, and quietly asked, "What happened to Xiao Bai? You dare ask me what happened to Xiao Bai? Even though I like Jihan, I still don't like how you gave her what was originally Fengju's. It's not that you didn't know Fengju needed the saha fruit. Because you gave it to Jihan, she had no other way but to sneak to Jiayu Spring and steal it before it was picked. How can her 30,000 years worth of magic withstand the 4 pythons protecting the fruit? She's now trapped inside the serpent formation with her life on the line. I, Meng Xiao, and even Her Majesty the Queen don't know what to do." In the middle of his speech, a gust of wind suddenly whirled past him. He turned to ask Lian Song, "Where did Ice Face go?" Lian Song closed his fan, his facial expression gloomy. "Rescuing." Then he added, "I knew something was going to happen." Jiayu Spring's surroundings were in ruins. The 4 pillars had collapsed. There was no traces of the clear blue stream. The only thing remained unscathed in the vicinity of the pillars was the saha tree. The sun had risen high outside, but within the force field, it was still pitch black. The 4 pythons awaited in the 4 corners in guard, their towering eyes as red as burning lanterns. They were safeguarding a force field foggy with dense blue smoke. Within it was a white-robed maiden floating in the air with her eyes closed. Her long black hair flowed down like inky silk. It was uncertain whether she was in a coma or fast asleep. Outside the crumbled pillars, fierce gale hissed in bouts. Dong Hua remained in the air as he collectedly looked at Fengju being trapped inside the force field. Despite her pale face, her chest was still heaving. How fortunate! He sighed in relief, his expression unchanged. In reality, he knew she was very beautiful, but because she was so animated, people's attention was often drawn to her personality. At this time, when she lay still inside the force field, her elegant features were more pronounced. White skirt, white blouse didn't suit her, however. It was the enchanting bright red of Sahamanjasaka that suited her better. He had seen his share of beautiful women in the overlong years he lived. Fengju wasn't necessarily the most beautiful, but fate was funny that way. All the beauties, no matter how alluring, were never able to leave an impression on him. Only her, whether her smile, whether her frown, whether her embarrassment, even when she made a face at him, he remembered it all. Each image was crystal clear in his mind. Liansong said she was the baby fox in the past. It was good if she was. But if she wasn't, it made no difference to him. Faint Buddhist hymns resounded in the air, immersed within melancholic flute notes, fleetingly, then silent again. He lowered his gaze, his eyes pausing on the Bianiao queen and her prostrated subjects. He coldly spoke, "What exactly is that force field?" Still not over their surprise at why His Majesty had personally come here, they stayed rooted in a stupor without being able to answer. Meng Xiao, who was Fengju's friend, was extremely worried over her imprisonment. Finally clasped his hands together in response. "Your Majesty, it's not a force field that is trapping Princess Juji. It's Arainia's dream." When the word Arainia left Meng Xiao's mouth, those who prostrated on the ground, all but Jihan, trembled visibly. Meng Xiao retold the tale, and it goes as follows. In ancient lore, Arainia was an unrivaled beauty. She died a grievous death and never did reincarnate. Her soul turned into a dream maze and drifted in Fanyangu. Anyone who fell into her dream would fall into Arainia's sentiments while she was still alive. Those who weren't strong enough would never be able to escape. They'd stay instead in an eternal sleep until their fairy energy was completely drained by the dream and they themselves turned into mere smoke. When Princess Juji got lost inside the serpent formation, she must have entered the Arainia dream at the same time it drifted by. Arainia was nurtured by the 4 pythons in these pillars since she was young. They must have thought Princess Juji was Arainia and thus determinedly fought to protect her by keeping outsiders from intruding. Besides the lost person coming out himself, there was a safer way to solve Arainia's dream. The person closest to him could enter the dream to bring him back. But in the current situation, one must first pass the serpent formation in order to enter the dream and bring Princess Juji out. It wasn't difficult to battle the 4 pythons, but Arainia's dream was merely a shifting image. It only manifested into concrete reality when someone entered inside. This reality took form in a pale blue force field. The dream's rendered world was unusually fragile. Fighting ground was inevitably turbulent. If the dream was inadvertently broken, Princess Juji could end up gravely injured or even dead. They also considered the option of sending someone with high cultivation to fight the beasts while keeping the dream intact to bring the princess out. But Arainia's dream was sensitive to strong individuals. Anyone who entered this dream had to leave his fairy energy 100 meters outside the dream field. By only using his mortal body could one smoothly enter. Otherwise, the dream could break. But how could anyone challenge these pythons after leaving their fairy energy behind? The scenario at hand was indeed a dilemma. No one knew what to do. From last night's discovery of Zhuge's imprisonment until now, no one dared to act rashly, all for this reason. Princess Zhuge's prospects seemed more grim than good. When Liansong hastily arrived, he saw Meng Xiao speaking interminably, saying things he could not hear. He only saw that once Meng Xiao stopped speaking, the people on the ground altogether began to wipe their tears. Although he didn't understand why they were crying, it was moving to see so many people doing the same somber gesture. As he was about to step forward, Dong Hua turned around and saw him first. Dong Hua's expression was utterly normal. He was made at ease. Dong Hua had always been called Ice Face by Yan Chaiwu, but from their years of friendship, Lian-song knew his expression could never remain as such if Fengju were to be in trouble. He was about to say hello when Dong Hua had come before him. With the same unaffected voice he used when he gifted him new tea flavors, he said, "You came at the right time. I have 2 favors to ask of you." He paused to look up at Fengju, who was sleeping deeply inside the serpent formation. "If she's the only one to make it out alive, bring her back safely to King Kaiyu and hand her directly to Bai Yi. Afterward, seek Moi Wan from Kunlun. Tell him Dong Hua Daijun leaves the Huiming realm to him. He'll understand." It sounded like a will. Lian-song smiled and glanced to the force field. "Because it's been years since I fought any battle, I'm afraid I won't be as quick as before. But if those pythons want to strangle you, they'd still have a difficult time." He hadn't finished speaking when he suddenly stopped. Lian-song, who never stopped smiling even as the Tai mountain was crumbling down, suddenly changed his expression as he jumped and grabbed onto Dong Hua, who was calmly removing his fairy energy and nonchalantly stepping into the python formation. Out of thin air, Yan Chaiwu appeared and stopped him. In his eyes was a pensiveness never before seen. He softly said, "This is the only way." He glanced to the python formation where thunder and lightning was starting to amass, rain pouring like hail. "I've racked my brains for 1 night and half a day without result because I never thought about removing my fairy energy and barging into the serpent formation by myself. I'm not a good enough friend. Ice Face's righteousness is like the sky itself. He has my respect." 2 people dared trespass the python's territory within 2 days, making the serpents livid with fury. Their hisses were like demonic wails. Blade-sharp lightning bolts directed at Dong Hua. Without his fairy energy to protect him, Dong Hua's body was instantly slashed. The seeping blood was quickly diluted in rainwater. The queen and her subjects were wrought with horror watching this scene, but not knowing how to help, remained frozen in shock. After being pulled back by Xiao Yan, Lian-song probably understood now Dong Hua's reason. He stood by silently without a word. He and Dong Hua were old friends. In truth, he didn't know how much older Dong Hua would be if they were to compare their ages. He was born after the chaotic war times, hence he'd never witnessed Dong Hua's achievements with his own eyes. He had heard Moi Wan mention Dong Hua in the past, however. According to the ancient god, only in prehistoric times did true battlefields exist. If they were to speak of these battles, they had to mention Dong Hua Daijun. Each time he stepped out of a battle, his body was covered in blood, but his face never once changed. Such fortitude was unparalleled. Inside the python formation, thunder continued to pound ceaselessly. The collar and sleeves on Dong Hua's white robe were soaked in red and gold. To avoid agitating the pythons and disturbing the dream in which Fengju was sleeping, Daijun maintained an appropriately slow pace. Rainwater dripped down his cuffs in a crimson color. Daijun remained unflinching. Suddenly, someone among the kneeling crowd behind the queen rose on her feet and stumbled toward Yan Chaiwu. Dressed entirely in white, it was Jihan. With tears streaming down her face, she tugged on Xiao Yan's robe and pleaded, "Please save Daijun. Please pull him back. I'll promise you anything you want." Xiao Yan remained quiet and turned his back on Jihan. Jihan held onto his robe as she sobbed disconsolately. Fengju faintly heard the sounds of rumbling thunder and falling rain someplace far off. From the time she fell into this void, she felt as though she was in a constant fuzzy state. Sometimes she was awake, sometimes not. Her mind became foggier. Every time she woke, she forgot yet another thing. Last time she stirred, she couldn't remember why she had fallen into this world. Would she be staying in this eternal sleep? After many lapses, would she not remember who she was anymore? Feeling fearful, she wanted to leave this place, but each time she roused from her trance, she felt her consciousness drifting farther away in lethargy. Her eyes were blurry, her limbs immobile. Moreover, each time she opened her eyes, waiting for her were but the silent darkness and throbbing pain. But this time appeared to be slightly different. Thunder and rain grew more audible, as if they were striking by her ears. Someone's hand was touching her head, it felt cold, and moved down to her cheek, then it tucked away the stray hair behind her ears. Fengju lifted her eyes and saw a silver-maned man in purple garments looking down at her. At this time, in this place, if she was awake she'd be greatly surprised to see Daijun. But her mind was clouded right now. When was it? Where was it? She hadn't a clue. Was she a young Fengju or a grown Fengju? She had no idea either. But she seemed to know this person. Wasn't he Dong Hua? Then hazily, she recognized he was someone she had really liked. How wonderful it was that he came to look for her. Yet she asked him a question contrary to her feelings. What are you doing here? Dong Hua looked at her with his placid eyes, but he did not answer. Her sight gradually cleared and Fengju saw that his entire body was drenched. You must be cold, she uttered in surprise. Again, Dong Hua did not reply her. He only looked at her silently, then pulled her into his arms. At length he asked, "Are you very frightened?" Fengju was momentarily confused, her limbs felt awkward, and she was unsure of where to place them. Daijun asked whether she was frightened. Yes, she was very frightened. She nodded honestly. He smoothed back her disarray hair and comforted her in a low voice, "Don't be afraid. I'm here now." Tears unexpectedly gushed out. Her mind was a blank, but she could feel grievances surging in her heart. Her limbs seemed to have been able to move. She ventured her hand to Daijun's back and choked back her tears. "I thought I should wait for you. I was actually sure you wouldn't come, but then you did. You don't know how happy I am." She heard Daijun whispered back, "I came for you." She hazily perceived that the king was being very gentle today. How wonderful, so different from the usual Dong Hua. But how was the usual Dong Hua like? In this moment she couldn't remember either. Her mind weighed heavily as her awareness started to cloud. She caught his last words and said, "You're here, but I know you'll leave again. I remember I always seem to watch your back. But I'm very sleepy today, She sensed herself mumbling on, but her head was drowning further and further into confusion and fogginess. The embrace around her tightened, and before she slumped deeper into her sleep, she faintly heard one last thing from him. Daijun whispered to her, "I won't leave this time. Sleep, Xiao Bai. When you wake, we'll be home." Appeased, she once again slipped back into unawareness. By her ears remained the obscure sounds of striking thunder and hissing serpents, but her mind was calm, so utterly calm without fear nor fright. All pain dissolved away when she was in Dong Hua's arms. End of Volume 1. Visit 3 Lives 3 Worlds, the Pillow Book lower volume audio book for the continuation of the story.